Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Bedford Park, a southern suburb in Adelaide, seemed like the perfect place for my younger sister Kara, name changed, and her flatmate Bea to stay when they rented a unit there in 2002. With its convenient location near their university, it appeared ideal for their studies. However, they hadn't anticipated sharing the space with an unexpected flatmate. In 2003 or 2004, my husband Rex T and I drove from Sydney to Adelaide to visit Kara. As we arrived at Bedford Park, the sun was setting, casting a strange light on the building. It looked cold and uninviting, like a block of Lego bricks or an old hospital. Walking into the foyer, I was startled by a dark shape darting across the floor. I told myself it was just a possum or a large rat, though the unsettling feeling in my chest suggested otherwise. The space felt strangely empty, yet heavy with an unexplainable presence. Rex T, always practical, remarked that the layout looked like an office building hastily converted into student housing. At the time, we had no idea about the strange experiences Kara and Bea had been living with. While things had calmed down during our visit, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later, Bea moved to the unit upstairs when her sister Debbie came to stay. Unfortunately, they discovered that the upstairs unit was even noisier than the one below. Every day, they heard loud knocking sounds and footsteps echoing through the space. Determined to find the source, Bea began checking every corner of the unit. The bathroom door was firmly shut, the windows were closed, and there was no draft to explain the noise. Yet the banging grew louder, as if someone were kicking at the bathroom door. When Bea opened it, no one was there. Frustrated and uneasy, she called her parents, who brought in a pastor to bless the unit. The activity subsided temporarily but returned with a sense of unease that seemed to cling to the walls. Their mother, Ellen, visited them one day and immediately sensed a presence in the hallway near the bathroom. She felt drawn to a mirror they had hung on the wall. On one occasion, Ellen saw the shadow of a tall man in the reflection. It had no distinct features, just a long, dark outline that seemed to loom over her. At barely 5 feet tall, Ellen felt dwarfed by the figure, which exuded a sneering, menacing energy. Shortly after her sighting, the banging sounds intensified again, and Ellen insisted the pastor return. Once more, the activity calmed, but the unsettling atmosphere never fully disappeared. Kara, curious but hesitant, agreed to spend a night at Bea's unit. Setting up a bed on the living room sofa, she immediately noticed the oppressive energy. The hallway felt particularly cold and heavy, even though it was late spring. As she tried to sleep, a crushing pressure settled on her chest. Though she could move her arms and legs, she felt pinned down, unable to cry out. Desperately, she prayed in her mind, and just as suddenly as it began, the sensation lifted. Shaken and unable to sleep, Kara stayed awake until dawn. The next morning, she told Bea she wouldn't spend another night there. Years later, at a university reunion, Kara and Bea met Anne, a previous tenant of Bea's unit. Anne avoided Kara's questions about her time at Bedford Park and seemed reluctant to discuss her experience. It wasn't until much later that Kara discovered Anne had asked Bea repeatedly if she was sure she wanted to live there. Anne had clearly known something, but Bea, drawn by the low rent and convenient location, had decided to move in anyway. Even the landlord, Roger, had heard complaints from tenants about the constant noises and strange atmosphere in the units. One tenant, a man from India, described the space as noisy and filled with a negative energy. He and his family moved out after just 8 months, unable to handle the eerie environment. Although Kara and Bea have long since moved away from Bedford Park, the mystery of the other flatmate lingers. Tenants come and go, each leaving with similar complaints, while the landlord dismisses any suggestion of the paranormal. Whatever haunts Bedford Park remains unseen but undeniably present, quietly coexisting with its unknowing residents. My mother has always been a quiet, private person, especially when it comes to talking about spirits. She believes that speaking about them gives them power. Despite this, I recently had a rare, long conversation with her, nearly 4 hours, about her life, her regrets, and some of her experiences with the supernatural. These stories have stuck with me, and I feel they hold lessons worth sharing. When I was a child, I'd overheard bits of one story my mother told an adult, but she never shared much detail with me directly. I think I was about 11 or 12 when I first heard her talk about it. On the phone recently, she opened up more than ever before, and suddenly, everything clicked. I realized there might be a reason why our family has had so many encounters with spirits. When my mother was very young, she got involved with my father, who was quite a bit older than her. She was only 16, and he was 25. Early on, she discovered that he and his friends practiced what they called white witchcraft. They would gather around a fire, form a circle, and chant spells. My mother didn't understand much about it, but felt a mix of fear and disbelief at what they were doing. Then, one night, they brought out a Ouija board. Mom said they contacted something that claimed to be an aborted fetus. The board spelled out words like dark, pain, and hurt. One of the men controlling the board suddenly collapsed, rolling onto the ground in a fetal position with his eyes rolled back. At that moment, the door to my room, where I was just a baby, slammed shut. My mother, overwhelmed with a terrible feeling, ran up the stairs. On her way, she smelled a strong scent of old women's perfume coming from the kitchen to my door. When she reached the door, it wouldn't budge. The handle turned, but the door stayed stuck. Frantic, she shouted, "Stay away from my baby, you asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." Suddenly, the door flew open, and she grabbed me and left the house. Soon after, she decided to leave my father altogether, especially since he didn't seem to care about the danger she felt. Mom's first encounter with the supernatural happened when she was about 6 or 7 years old. She was lying on her bed, relaxed and carefree, when the air around her grew thick and cold. Suddenly, she felt an invisible weight press down on her, pinning her head into the mattress. She tried to scream, but the pressure was too strong. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. Terrified, she ran out of the room but didn't tell her parents, fearing they wouldn't believe her. Years later, when I was around 11 or 12, my mom was in a toxic relationship with a man I disliked. One night, she woke up feeling a heavy presence. She turned to him and said, "Hold me, it's coming. I can feel it." He put his arm around her, and even he admitted he could feel something there. Though invisible, it was pressing down on her chest and weighing on the mattress. She struggled to breathe until, after what felt like forever, the presence lifted. Shaken and scared, she cried in his arms. Another experience happened when Mom and I worked together at a retirement home. I was about 25 then. She only worked night shifts, while I covered various shifts, so we rarely worked in the same ward. One night, Mom saw something unusual at the end of a corridor. It was darker than the surrounding darkness and had glowing red eyes. She quickly left the area, unsettled by what she'd seen. Later that night, she went to check on a resident whose light was on. Mom peeked through the door and was about to ask, "Are you okay?" But the resident's face looked completely different. It was black and had the same glowing red eyes she'd seen earlier. Shocked, Mom backed away, saying, "Okay then," and shut the door. When she returned minutes later, the resident was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Hearing these stories made me reflect on our family's connection to the spirit world. I've come to believe my father's actions, his involvement in witchcraft, and the supernatural, may have opened a door that made us more sensitive to these experiences. While I'm trying to embrace and learn from these encounters, my mother remains firm in her belief that talking about spirits gives them strength. She views them as parasites that feed on negative energy, and she insists they can't stand the light or positivity. This isn't my personal story, but I was there when it happened, though I was just a baby at the time. The events were shared with me later by my mother and eldest sister, Victoria. It's something they still struggle to talk about. I was no older than 1, sleeping on my mother's bed. Mom and my 2 older sisters Victoria and Rose were in the same room, standing in front of my mother's dresser. The dresser was large, with a big mirror on top. They were chatting and combing each other's hair. A simple, quiet moment. Victoria was about 8 years old, and Rose was around 5. As Victoria combed Rose's hair, she noticed something odd. Rose's reflection in the mirror didn't look right. Her face seemed stiff and her body rigid, as if she couldn't move. Rose was staring at the mirror without blinking, which made Victoria uneasy. She called Rose's name and turned her around, asking what was wrong. My mother noticed, too, and became just as concerned. But Rose didn't respond. She didn't blink or react at all. Then Rose began to speak, but it wasn't her voice. The voice was deep, like a man's. It didn't sound anything like her. Her eyes, too, were different. My mother always said they weren't her eyes. Sometimes they described her eyes as red or black, but always dark and unfamiliar. The voice continued to speak, but my mother and sister couldn't understand the words. They said it sounded like another language. It terrified them. They shouted at Rose to stop and called her name repeatedly. They even shook her, and at one point, Victoria slapped her face to try to snap her out of it. But Rose stayed stiff, her body unresponsive, and the strange voice kept coming out of her. Finally, Rose just stopped. She blinked and acted as though nothing had happened. When they questioned her, she had no memory of the event and couldn't understand what they were talking about. To her, it was as if nothing had happened at all. She carried on as though no time had passed. This deeply disturbed my mother and Victoria. Even though it probably lasted only a few minutes, it felt like much longer. To this day, Rose has no memory of the incident and dislikes when anyone brings it up. She refuses to believe it was anything paranormal. She once went to a psychic who suggested it might have been a spirit trying to send a message to my mother. Rose, however, remains skeptical. Rose had a history of sleepwalking as a child, to the point where my parents once caught her opening the front door in the middle of the night. Because of this, Rose believes what happened might have been a common sleep disturbance, where children act strangely when woken mid-sleep. She says it might have just scared my mother and sister because they didn't understand it. But this explanation doesn't sit well with me, or with my mother and Victoria. Rose wasn't asleep when it happened. She was standing, awake, and talking with them moments before she froze and started speaking in that voice. My mother and Victoria get upset whenever the story is mentioned. It's something they can't forget, no matter how much time has passed. There's one more detail that has always felt eerie to me. My father and 2 older brothers weren't home that night. They were attending the wake for my grandfather, who had just passed away. My grandfather was Australian and didn't speak any other languages, but my parents said he wasn't particularly kind, especially toward my mother. While I don't know if there's a connection, the timing feels strange. It's always made me wonder. There was another unusual moment involving Rose, though it happened before I was born. When Rose was about 4, she was playing on the driveway while my mom tended to the garden nearby. Mom had her back to Rose when she suddenly turned around, scooped her up, and moved her to a garden bed. She didn't know why she did it. It was like something else had made her do it. Just seconds later, my dad reversed the car over the exact spot where Rose had been playing. You wouldn't have seen her there. Mom has always insisted that something made her act without thinking, as if she were being guided. Sometimes I wonder if these moments were connected, or if they were just strange coincidences. Maybe my grandfather was involved somehow, trying to scare my mom or protect Rose. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This is my first time sharing a story like this, so I hope I can explain everything clearly. I've dealt with strange things my entire life, and I'm finally ready to talk about it. To start, some background about the house. It's not old. My mom designed and built it about 16 years ago. Before my parents bought the land, 2 couples had owned it. Both couples divorced, and one also faced financial struggles. There's a rumor that before the area became residential, it was used as a dumping ground for bodies by the mob. I've never believed that, but it's a strange detail. The house is a large Queenslander-style home halfway up a hill, with the backyard leading into a forest. There's no fence, so the forest feels very close, especially at night. I was 6 years old when we moved in. My bedroom was upstairs, at the end of a long hallway, with a window facing the forest. At first, I loved having my own room away from my younger brothers, but it didn't take long for that excitement to turn into fear. It started with knocking sounds from the roof. That might seem normal, but there's no attic, and we couldn't figure out what was causing it. A snake maybe, but snakes don't knock. After a few months, the knocking stopped, but something worse began. Every night, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward my room. They were loud, like someone wearing heavy boots. I would hide under the covers, peeking out occasionally, but the hallway was always empty. The footsteps always stopped right at my open door. When I tried closing the door, things got even scarier. One night, as the footsteps came closer, I stayed in bed, thinking the closed door would protect me. But when the footsteps stopped, there was knocking on my door. I froze, terrified. Then the door slowly opened on its own. Nothing was there. I started to relax, until the door slammed shut violently. I screamed and ran to my mom, who was sleeping on the bottom bunk in my youngest brother's room to escape my dad's snoring. She let me sleep there that night but told me the next day it was probably just a night terror. I wanted to believe her, but the knocking, footsteps, and door opening kept happening. Eventually, my mom saw something herself. Around this time, I started seeing cats around the house. These weren't real cats. They weren't fully there. One day, while I was homesick, my mom was cleaning the kitchen when she gasped. I thought she had dropped something, but she was staring at the floor with a shocked expression. Later, she admitted she had seen one of the cats I had been telling her about. From then on, she believed me. By the time I was 8, my parents had divorced. I had also become braver, or maybe just numb, to the strange things happening in the house. The knocks, footsteps, doors, and phantom cats. But then the shadows appeared. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. They weren't ordinary shadows. They were solid and dark, often standing at the foot of my bed or in my doorway. Sometimes they blocked the hallway when I tried to get a glass of water at night, forcing me to retreat to my room. I told my mom, but she wasn't living with us anymore. My dad wasn't someone I could talk to about this. He would have just called me a liar and punished me. My nightmares became worse, waking me up gasping, screaming, or crying. And every time I woke up from one, there was always a shadow nearby, watching. My youngest brother, who was 4 at the time, started acting strangely too. He developed nervous twitches and would stare at empty spaces as if watching something move toward him. When nights I couldn't sleep in my room, I hid in his. When I told him about the shadows, he nodded silently, his eyes wide. Years later, now that he's older, he admitted to seeing a lot of strange things back then, but was too scared to talk about them. Over the years, other strange things happened. Lights turned off on their own. My fan would switch on and off even though I never used it. The TV would change channels by itself. But the shadows were the worst. They terrified me, and I had no one to turn to for help. I've moved out and back into the house a few times over the years. My mom lives here again now, and my brother stays with my dad. We've had new housemates, and even my fiancé move in, but the strange things haven't stopped. In fact, they've started happening again recently. I'm sharing these experiences in the hope that someone might help me understand what's wrong with this house before it affects anyone else too badly. When I was a kid, strange things would happen in our family home. These weren't grand or terrifying events, but small, unsettling moments that seemed to happen only to me. Or maybe I was just the only one noticing them. I wanted to share a few of these moments that still linger in my memory. It all started with the footsteps. Late at night, I'd often sit downstairs watching TV, and I'd hear the sound of movement upstairs, where all the bedrooms were. It sounded just like footsteps crossing the floor. I'd pause, turn off the TV, and go upstairs to check. but everyone was always in bed. Sometimes, I'd even wake my mom to ask if she'd been walking around, but she always said no. Most of the time, when I stopped to listen, the sound would stop too, leaving me unsure of what I'd heard. But one night, when I was home alone, the sound was different. The footsteps were louder and clearer than ever, steady, deliberate thuds across the floor above me. Thud, thud, thud. There was no mistaking it this time. My heart raced as I realized no one else was home, and all the windows were shut. The sound wasn't random or accidental. It was footsteps. I panicked, grabbed the phone, and called a friend. I ugly cried into the receiver and stayed downstairs until the sun came up. Only then did I feel brave enough to go upstairs. Another time, something happened with the staircase. Our house had 2 staircases, and while they creaked often, it never really bothered me. The sound was just part of the house settling. But the very top step of the upstairs staircase had a distinct creak. It was a sound I knew well because my siblings and I used to sway on that step just to make it creak, much to my mom's annoyance. One afternoon, I was upstairs in my room doing homework. It was a sunny day, and my parents were outside in the backyard, watering the garden. I could hear them chatting as I worked. My door was open, and from where I sat, I could see the hallway and the top of the stairs. Suddenly, I heard that familiar creak from the top step, the exact sound that only happened when someone stood on it and shifted their weight. Without thinking, I turned to look, expecting to see one of my siblings. But no one was there. I stared at the stairs for a long moment, then called out, "Hello?" No answer. I got up and checked the house, but I was the only one inside. Later, I asked my brother and sisters if they'd ever heard the step make that sound on its own. They all said no. My brother even teased me, saying, "That step doesn't creak by itself. Someone has to be standing on it." My sisters were spooked when I told them what happened. The upstairs hallway had another strange feature, an open vanity area with 2 ceramic hand towel rings. When you used the towels, the ceramic would squeak and thud against the wall. Sometimes when I was alone, I'd hear that sound, as if someone was drying their hands. But when I checked, no one was there. Even after I moved out, I heard the sound while visiting my parents. It never stopped being eerie. One of the strangest moments happened after I moved out. I was back visiting, sitting at the dining table with my mom and one of my sisters. We were having a serious family discussion. Across from us, hanging on the wall, was an old family portrait, a black and white photo of my parents and siblings dressed in Wild West costumes, taken at a theme park. The photo had a strange, grainy look to it and always felt a little unsettling. As we talked, the photo suddenly slid down the wall with incredible force and crashed to the floor. The sound was so loud, we all jumped up in shock. It wasn't like the frame just fell. It felt like something had grabbed it and yanked it off the wall. We checked the back of the frame and the nail in the wall, but nothing was broken. There wasn't even a breeze in the room. We were all spooked but didn't talk much about it. Instead, we put the frame aside and left the room. Looking back, I remember glancing at the photo just before it fell, thinking how odd it was to have such a creepy picture hanging while we were having such a serious conversation. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but soon after, my family went through some dark and difficult times. Sometimes I wonder if that moment was a warning. It feels like something out of a movie, but it's hard to shake the feeling that it meant something. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, these moments have stayed with me, and I still think about them whenever I visit my old home. This story still gives me chills when I think about it. I was about 15 years old, and I had been home alone for a week while my parents were away. My older siblings had already moved out, so it was just me in the house. I wasn't the biggest fan of being alone because something weird always seemed to happen, but this time had been fine until the very last day. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was in the backyard with my dog. My parents were on their way home, about 2 hours away, and I was feeling good. Nothing strange had happened all week, and I was relieved. I was standing under the veranda, chatting with my dog, a big, lovable mix of German Shepherd and Australian Blue Cattle. He was playing with a toy, shaking it around, while I enjoyed the peaceful moment. Then I heard it. A small screech, like the sound of one of the dining room chairs sliding across the tiled floor. I paused for a moment but decided to ignore it. It wasn't loud, and I convinced myself it was nothing. I looked back at my dog. That's when I noticed he had stopped playing and turned his head completely around to stare at the dining room window. His ears were up, his body tense. He was locked in on something. At first, I thought, oh, he must have heard it too. But then he moved in a way I had never seen before, slow and deliberate, almost unnatural. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He dropped his toy and looked directly at me, holding my gaze with a solid, unblinking stare. It felt like he was trying to tell me something urgent. My heart started to race. Without breaking his focus, he walked over to the base of the dining room window and began to growl. It was a low, deep growl, the kind that sends chills down your spine. His entire body was stiff, his ears straight up, and his eyes locked on the window. Whatever he sensed, he did not like it. I tried to pretend everything was fine. "Come here, boy," I called, patting my knees in an overly cheerful voice. He didn't move. Instead, he turned his head to look at me again, slowly, unnaturally. His eyes met mine, and I felt frozen, like I couldn't move. Every instinct told me something was wrong. I took a step back and sank into the chair behind me. My dog turned back to the window and continued to growl, occasionally letting out a low bark. He was focused, completely still, like a statue. Nothing I did could distract him. His behavior was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was guarding me from something. For the next 2 hours, I stayed outside, too afraid to go back into the house. My dog remained under the window, ears alert and eyes on something I couldn't see. He eventually sat down and later lay down, but he never broke his watchful stance. Even when he seemed to relax, his ears stayed perked, and his eyes never wavered from their invisible target. When my parents finally arrived home, I felt a wave of relief. My mom found me in the backyard, and I told her what had happened. Feeling safer now that they were home, I went to the back door to say goodbye to my dog, as was our tradition. Normally, he'd come over for a kiss and an "I love you," but not this time. He stayed under the window looking at me, then back at the window, and then back at me. He let out a soft whine, as if to say, "I want to do our thing, but I can't leave my post." I understood. I blew him a kiss and went inside. The dining room looked normal. The chairs were in place, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When I glanced back out the window, my dog had left his spot under the window, as though he'd finally decided it was safe. It felt like he had been guarding me until he was sure I was okay. Even now, I can't explain what happened that day, but one thing I'm sure of is that my dog saw or sensed something I couldn't. Whatever it wasn't something he liked, and that alone was enough to make me trust his instincts. When I was around 11 to 14 years old, something happened that I still can't fully explain. It was tied to a moment I had almost forgotten, but it left an impression on me that lingers to this day. It all started when my dad rented Stanley Kubrick's The Shining from the local video store. Back then, we had a DVD and VCR combo player, and the movie's reputation was enough to intrigue me, until I watched part of it. I walked into the rumpus room one day while my dad was already watching it. I'm not sure how much I saw, but I vividly remember the scene with the old woman in the bathtub. It made me feel physically sick, and I left the room. I couldn't watch anymore. I don't remember if I ever saw the famous hallway scene with the twin girls in the movie, or if I just knew it from its reputation. It's referenced so often that it's hard to say. A few days later, I was in the rumpus room alone. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting on a bean bag, close to the TV. Behind me and to my right was the staircase leading up to the dining room. My mom was asleep in her armchair just a few meters from the top of the stairs, and my dad was upstairs in bed. No one else was home. The TV was on, but I wasn't really paying attention. It was late, and I was a little bored. Then, out of nowhere, The screen went gray and turned to static. I sighed, annoyed, thinking it was my fault. The TV was old, about as old as I was, and I had a bad habit of accidentally hitting its buttons with my toes. I got up, crouched in front of the screen, and started pressing buttons to fix it. My face was just inches from the screen. Suddenly, a black line dropped down the middle of the static, and the screen changed. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was that scene from The Shining. The twin girls in the hallway stood there saying, "Come play with us." My heart froze. Then the scene rewound itself and started again. "Come play with us." Over and over. I couldn't move. I started frantically pressing buttons, desperate to make it stop. I thought maybe the videotape was stuck in the VCR, so I opened the flap to check. But then, in between the looping dialogue, I heard something else. A soft whisper. It said my name. I froze, staring at the screen. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but the whisper felt too real. I didn't stick around to find out. I ran up the stairs to my mom, tears streaming down my face, shaking her awake. She barely stirred, muttering something about changing the channel. When I tried to explain, she waved me off and told me the TV was too loud. That's when I realized I couldn't hear the twins anymore, just the loud static blaring downstairs. I turned around and cautiously peered down the staircase. The rumpus room was dark, the TV glowing with gray static, its volume unbearably high. My mom had already fallen back asleep. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do. Finally, I forced myself to go back downstairs. I told myself it had to be the tape, just stuck in the VCR. When I reached the TV, I turned it off and checked the VCR. It was empty. I checked the DVD player, also empty. My heart was pounding as I turned the TV back on. The static was gone, but the volume was turned all the way up. The green bars filled the screen, showing it was at maximum. No one in my house ever said it that loud. I quickly turned it down and flipped through the channels to see if the movie was on. Nothing. No Shining, no Stephen King references, nothing that could explain what I'd just seen. I bolted upstairs to bed, leaving the lights on in the rumpus room. My mom yelled at me for that, but I didn't care. I spent the rest of the night under the covers, too scared to sleep. The next day, I searched the TV guide from top to bottom. There was no sign of The Shining or anything related to it. My dad told me he had returned the tape to the video store 3 days earlier, well before that night. I couldn't make sense of it. For a long time, I just pushed the memory aside because it felt too strange to process. Years later, when I was 21, I had a moment that brought it all rushing back. I was watching Twister at 3 a.m., alone, and for a split second, I thought something similar was about to happen. It didn't, but the fear I felt was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. My heart raced, and my body shook for hours afterward. I grew up in Canberra, Australia, and this story is about the time I lived in a haunted house in the late 1990s when I was a boy. I've done my best to recall everything exactly as it happened, leaving out details I wasn't sure about to keep the story honest. This is all true, as far as my memory allows. We moved into the house in August 1998, and from the moment I stepped inside, it felt wrong. The house seemed cold and unwelcoming, and for some reason, I remember thinking the pine trees out front looked dead, even though they were actually green and healthy. I was in my early teens and moved into the basement, which quickly became my least favorite place. The basement was gloomy and dated, with bare brown brick walls and a murky green carpet threaded with brown. There was a small toilet cubicle in the corner, painted a grotesque orange, and a large bathroom sink just outside of it. The air carried a faint smell of cigarette smoke, like it was stuck in the walls from the 1970s. It felt cut off from the rest of the house, separated by a staircase. From the start, I complained about the basement's atmosphere. It was more than just being a moody teenager. I felt uneasy there, like I was being watched. Sleep didn't come easily, and the room just didn't feel right. But life moved on. I was going through a rough patch, adjusting to a new school, testing boundaries, and being a typical teenager. The first strange thing happened one night when I was in my room. Probably around 9 p.m. I heard heavy breathing coming from the toilet cubicle. It was clear and distinct. Frightened, I called for my dad. He came downstairs, tightened the taps, and told me it was just the pipes. That explanation reassured me, and the breathing stopped, but it didn't stay gone. The heavy breathing became a regular occurrence, sometimes happening as often as once a week. I learned to ignore it or even joke about it. Once, when my cousin and best friend were over, we made up a story about the ghost of old Humphrey living in the cubicle. We all heard the breathing that night, but we laughed it off. It didn't feel dangerous, just weird. Then things escalated. One stormy night, I woke to the sound of something being dragged across the carpet and a cold wind blowing through the room. I finally turned on the light and saw that the second door to my room, which led to the garage and had been locked and sealed, was wide open. The couch I had placed against it had been shoved across the floor, creating the dragging sound I'd heard. Shaken, I pushed the door shut, moved the couch back, and tried to sleep. I was only 14, but I did my best to push through the fear. Other things happened too. There were footsteps upstairs when no one else was home. Once, the bookcases in my dad's study fell over while I was alone in the house. A pile of wood my friend and I had gathered for a treehouse was scattered beneath the house after we had carefully stacked it. A music box started playing on its own in my sister's room, and my TV turned on by itself in the middle of the night more than once. Despite all this, I wasn't overly scared, at least not at first. My friends and I treated the odd occurrences as interesting, if not funny. Sleepovers at my house often came with the extra guest, who seemed to have breathing problems. But everything changed 2 summers later. At the start of 2000, I went to a Christian camp. My mom was a charismatic Christian, while my dad leaned more towards Stoic Catholicism, so religion wasn't new to me. But this camp reignited my faith in a way I hadn't expected. I came home thinking about God, Jesus, and service all the time. One day, while talking to a family friend about the strange events in our house, she suggested I pray for clarity. She said, "Ask God to show you if there's anything in your home that's not from Him." So I did. Standing in my room, I said a simple prayer. "Lord, if there is anything here that is not of you, please show it to me." Then, like someone in a horror movie, I opened my eyes, and nothing happened. Relieved, I went on with my day. But over the next 2 weeks, I started having strange dreams about my room and the toilet cubicle. In one, I moved all the furniture into the cubicle. I don't remember all the details, but the feeling in my room seemed to grow heavier. Then, one Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of screaming coming from the cubicle. It was loud, clear, and absolutely real. For at least 30 seconds, I lay frozen in terror, drenched in sweat. The room felt hostile and alien, and I didn't know what to do. Finally, I shouted, "Be gone in the name of Jesus Christ." Instantly, the screaming stopped. Shaking, I grabbed my phone, Bible, and a list of contact numbers from beside my bed. I called my youth leader, who calmly listened and reassured me. Eventually, I ran upstairs to my mom, who believed me right away. I've always been grateful for that. That night, I slept with the lights on, clutching my Bible, staring at the cubicle. The fear in the room was thick, and I didn't want to close my eyes. Around 3 a.m., I prayed for angels, and then I felt them. I didn't see them with my eyes, but I knew they were there. 2 tall, armored figures stood in the room, swords drawn. The air changed. My fear melted away, replaced by peace. I rolled over and fell asleep. But this wasn't the end. My mom eventually asked a minister from our Anglican church to bless the house. While well-meaning, the minister and his team dismissed me as an imaginative boy and didn't take the situation seriously. They prayed a little and even removed some of my books on ghosts and UFOs, saying they might be inviting the activity. After they left, the uneasy atmosphere remained. What happened in that house still stays with me, even after all these years. Some experiences can't be easily explained, and this is one of them. That night was one of the worst I can remember. At first, nothing unusual happened, but I couldn't sleep. My prayers felt like they were bouncing off the ceiling, and the room felt heavy with an angry, suffocating presence. The fear kept building until, in a near panic, I ran for the stairs around 11 p.m. It felt as if something was chasing me, reaching out with unseen hands to grab me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, as real as if it were right behind me. The air was cold and oppressive, and it felt like whatever was there had fully taken over. I woke my parents, desperate for help. My mom quickly made up my sister's bed for me, moving my sister into their room. My dad, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. He acted like the skeptical father in a cliché haunted house movie, brushing it off as if nothing unusual was happening. He even managed to sleep through the night. For the rest of us, sleep was impossible. As I lay stiff with terror in my sister's bed, the strange noises began. There were bangs and rattles around the house that didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. I could hear muffled voices, like conversations happening in distant rooms. I felt watched, certain that at any moment something would burst through the door. The house felt completely different, as though it no longer belonged to us. It was like we had become trespassers in some kind of eerie twilight zone. Even in my parents' room, things weren't normal. At one point, my mom's bedside phone, an old-fashioned one with a heavy base and a rotary dial, slid across the table on its own. She had to stop it with her hand. There were probably other odd things that night, but I can't remember all the details now. What I do remember is waiting for the daylight like a child lost in a dark forest, clinging to the hope that morning would save me. By now, we were all terrified. My mom reached out to some friends from her church, asking them to come over and pray. Meanwhile, I felt like I was losing my mind. I avoided my room entirely, only going in briefly during the day to grab clothes or other necessities. At night, I refused to go downstairs at all. The entire basement felt hostile, as if I wasn't welcome there. I slept in my sister's room, and she stayed with my parents. The unease continued, with occasional noises and the constant, overwhelming sense that something malicious was still there. When the prayer group finally came, I went for a walk with my dad while they worked. It was a weekday, so he must have taken time off from work. During the walk, I tried to explain everything that had been happening, but he wasn't interested. He talked about my education and how I needed to focus on school. Looking back, I understand his perspective. He wasn't a skeptic exactly. His strong Catholic upbringing had taught him not to dismiss these things, but he clearly didn't want to deal with it. He later admitted that he believed such things were better left alone. Still, at the time, his frustration with the situation made it difficult to connect with him. When we returned, my mom seemed reluctant to talk about what had happened during the prayer session. Things felt better, but the problem wasn't completely resolved. One of the women from the prayer group mentioned that there's a piece of the puzzle missing. She suggested my mom contact someone who specialized in these situations. In the meantime, I continued sleeping in my sister's room, avoiding the basement altogether. I missed a lot of school during this time because I wasn't getting enough sleep. A breakthrough came when my mom was outside gardening one day and struck up a conversation with a neighbor. Without any prompting, the neighbor shared some unsettling details about the house's history. In the 1970s, there had been a feud between the owners of our house and the family behind it. The feud involved a missing cat, bad blood, and strange behavior from the previous owners, whom the neighbor described as creepy. To make matters worse, everyone who had lived in the house before us had reportedly died of illness in the years that followed. For a 16-year-old, this was terrifying. It felt like we had finally found the missing piece of the puzzle. Eventually, my mom contacted the woman who had been recommended by the prayer group. Her name was Lynette, and she came over one afternoon to pray. She spent hours in the house, and afterward, everything changed. I had dreamed recently that my room was bright white and much larger than it really was. When I came home after Lynette's visit, it felt as though that dream had come true. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. I could finally breathe. For the first time, the house felt like it belonged to us again. Despite this, it took me 8 months to gather the courage to sleep in my room again. My parents helped by renovating the basement, replacing the carpets, and painting the toilet cubicle. Even then, The experience had a lasting impact on me. For a long time after, I felt disconnected from the world around me. School, grades, and daily life didn't seem to matter anymore. I became deeply focused on church and youth group, immersing myself in the idea of spiritual warfare. Looking back, I realized that this level of obsession wasn't healthy, but it took me years to find balance again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. About a year ago, I had an experience I'll never forget. It happened in Victoria, Australia, at a place called Aradali Asylum. Aradal is infamous for being a home for the untreatable, those whose mental health challenges were too severe for other facilities to handle. At its peak, the asylum housed around 900 patients annually, and some of the most horrific treatments were tested there. You're probably wondering why I'd willingly go to such a place. Honestly, I blame peer pressure. My best friend at the time convinced me to go on a ghost tour of the asylum as a way to celebrate my upcoming 16th birthday. After a lot of persuasion, and maybe a little manipulation, I finally agreed. Unlike my friend, who was curious but naive about the supernatural, I had already experienced enough strange things in my life to know how powerful and dangerous they could be. The tour began at 10:30 p.m. and lasted until 12:30 a.m. From the moment we arrived, I felt uneasy. The building itself seemed to drain the color out of everything around it. Just standing near it made me feel physically tired. Inside, it was even worse. The air felt heavy, and the atmosphere was suffocating. At the start of the tour, the guide handed out lanterns to certain people in the group. My friend and I were the youngest there by at least 10 years, so I wasn't expecting to be picked for anything. But when the guide reached the last lantern, he explained that whoever received it would have to stay at the back of the group for the entire tour and close every door we passed through. To my surprise and dread, he handed the lantern to me. I tried to stay calm, but the weight of the lantern quickly became more than just physical. The tour took us through several rooms, each with its own eerie story. I'll focus on two moments that shook me the most. The first happened in the storage room, located on the lowest level of the building. It felt more like a basement, with cold stone steps leading down to shelves lining the walls. While the guide spoke, I didn't feel much, just the usual unease I'd had since entering the asylum. But as the group began to leave, I had to wait for everyone else to go up the stairs before I could follow. This part of the tour was always the most stressful for me, as it meant I was alone for a moment, watching everyone disappear. As I started up the steps, I felt a sudden, hard poke on my shoulder. Instinctively, I turned around, but all I saw was darkness. My heart raced, but I refused to investigate further. I jogged up the stairs and slammed the door behind me, trying to shake off the fear. It may sound minor, but in that moment, it felt far from ordinary. The second experience was far worse. Near the end of the tour, we entered the surgery room. The space had two doors at the far end for moving patients and a steel surgery table in the center. The group gathered around the table as the guide explained its history. I stood at the back with my friend, trying to listen, but my attention was pulled elsewhere. The moment I stepped into the room, I felt an intense heat spread through me. Sweat dripped down my body, yet my limbs felt icy cold. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. My eyes were drawn to a corner near the door we'd entered. There, crouched in the shadows, was a man. His face was grim, and though he had no particularly striking features, the effect he had on me was overwhelming. At that point, I blacked out. My friend later filled in the gaps for me. She told me that I had been acting strangely, constantly glancing over my shoulder with a pale, terrified look on my face. When she asked if I was okay, I mumbled something incoherent. Then, while everyone else was distracted by a bat flying around the room, she noticed I was gone. She turned to find me backing into the same corner where I had seen the man. I wasn't speaking, just staring ahead with wide, frightened eyes. Acting on instinct, she grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. The moment she touched me, I snapped out of it. I felt dizzy and disoriented, but I was back in control. As the tour ended and we left the room, I looked back at the corner one last time. The man was still there, and he beckoned to me. I felt a slight tug, like something trying to pull me back, but I forced myself to walk away and slammed the door behind me. It wasn't until we reached the end of the hallway that I noticed I had a nosebleed. As we stepped outside, I felt one final tug, causing me to stumble before the dizziness faded and everything became clear again. That experience was unlike anything I've ever had before, and I hope never to have again. I've never felt so threatened. Whatever was in that room wanted me, and if it weren't for my friend, I'm not sure what might have happened. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that ghost tours or paranormal activities should never be done alone. Always bring someone with you and treat these situations with caution. You never know what might happen when things spiral out of your control. This is the first time I'm sharing one of my experiences. I live in Ipswich, Queensland, a small but growing town near Brisbane, Australia. Just outside Ipswich, as you head toward Brisbane, is a suburb called Wackle. Wackle is home to the infamous Woolston Park Mental Asylum. It's had different names over the years, but you might know it today as the Park Center for Mental Health. The place has a dark history, and even back then, it was rumored to be haunted. This happened in 2002. I was 18 at the time and still living at home. My cousins, one brother and one sister, and 3 other friends from church picked me up for a Mormon young adult dance. The dances were held regularly, and young people from all over the region would attend. We spent the night mingling, dancing, and catching up with friends. Around 11:30 p.m., we decided we'd had enough and made our way to the car. The car was an old Mitsubishi van that belonged to my cousin's parents. The front row had 3 seats, where my guy cousin, the driver, sat with 2 of our friends. The second row was for me and my girl cousin, and the last row was occupied by our other friend, who sprawled out to nap on the way home. Instead of going straight home, we decided to take a drive into Brisbane City. It was a warm Saturday night, and the streets were lively. We walked around, grabbed some ice cream, and talked with a few security guards we knew outside the nightclubs. None of us wanted to go inside wearing our church clothes, so after a while, we decided to head back to Ipswich. To get home quickly, we had to pass the turnoff for Woolston Park. My cousin, the driver, suddenly asked, "Do you guys want to check out Woolston?" It was almost 2 a.m. The 2 girls in the front hesitated, clearly scared, but still said yes. His sister, sitting beside me, rolled her eyes and kept chatting with me about her boyfriend. Our friend in the back didn't say anything. She was too tired to care. I shrugged and went along with it. I'd been to Woolston Park a few times before with friends, and nothing spooky ever happened. The scariest thing I'd seen was a patient shouting as security escorted them back to the grounds. This night, though, felt different. As we drove into the grounds, it was pitch black. My cousin turned off the headlights for a moment to show us how dark it was before his sister yelled at him to turn them back on. The grounds felt eerie and abandoned. No security cars patrolling like usual. No lights, just overgrown bushes and shadows. Then it happened. My cousin slammed on the brakes and yelled, "Did you see that?" The 2 girls in the front screamed, huddled together, and shouted, "Oh my gosh! Who was that? What's wrong with him?" I whipped around to look out the back window and caught a glimpse of a figure in the moonlight. It was a man, limping as he walked. My cousin said he'd seen the man standing by the bushes, staring at the van as we drove past. His sister dismissed it, laughing, "You're so full of it." But when he threatened to turn the van around, she and I yelled, "Yes, go back." We wanted to see for ourselves. When we drove back, there was no sign of the man. His sister smirked, saying, "See? I told you." But I told her I'd seen him too, and her expression changed to uneasy disbelief. We kept driving, looking for him. The van's dim lights scanned the dark road, and suddenly, they landed on him again. His back was to us as he walked along the grass. Something felt off. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and he had a limp. He didn't even turn around to acknowledge the van. As we got closer, the strange feeling grew stronger. His clothes looked like they were from the early 90s, light-colored jeans, a flannel shirt, and a worn-out corduroy backpack. His hair was blonde, matted, and tied back messily, with loose strands framing his face. He looked to be in his early 20s. My cousin slowed the van, and his sister slid open the window beside her. She leaned out to ask, "Excuse me, are you Auri?" But she didn't finish. The man turned to face us, and her scream pierced the night. The two girls in the front joined her, screaming louder than I'd ever heard. His face was unnatural. He was deathly pale, almost frozen white, with a strange blue and purple tinge. His eyes were glazed over, the rims red and raw, and his expression was blank. His lips parted as he let out a groaning sound, and his pale hand stretched toward the van. I was frozen, unable to move as my cousin's sister pressed into me, crushing me against the side of the van. When she finally hit her brother to snap him out of his daze, he floored the gas, and we sped away. Our friend in the backseat refused to look, crying and yelling, "No, I'm not getting up." She hadn't seen him, but she felt the terror in the car. Even now, I can see his face clearly in my mind. It was unlike anything I've ever seen on a living person. He didn't look alive. His scratches, pale veins, and lifeless eyes were like something out of a morgue. I still wonder who he was and how he got there. It's been years since that night, and I still think about him. I wonder if anyone else has seen what we saw. That's why I'm sharing this story, to find out if anyone else has experienced the same thing. I've been back to Woolston Park once since then, but it's not the same. The grounds are clean and well lit now, but the memory of that man haunts me. My partner and I moved to Ashfield in Sydney's inner west about 3 months ago. We've been together for 7 months now, and while we've had our ups and downs, we're happy overall. Finding a place to live wasn't easy because we were struggling financially. After weeks of searching, we found a boarding house that fit our needs. It's located in the city and right along the train lines, which is perfect since neither of us drives. The building itself is above some Chinese restaurants and looks like it was built around the 1900s. Many of the surrounding buildings are old, weathered, and full of character. I love the high ceilings and wooden floors, but being above restaurants in the city has brought its share of cockroaches, which we're still working to deal with. From the very beginning, I noticed something strange about the place. Walking down the narrow hallway to our room after dark gave me an uneasy feeling. It was as if someone, or something, was watching me. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia and didn't tell my partner. I didn't want to scare him, and I assumed it was all in my head. One evening about 2 months ago, I was at our table, which is right next to our bedroom door. I was chopping vegetables for dinner with some music playing softly in the background. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow glide past the door. It moved quickly, startling me for a moment, but I brushed it off and didn't mention it to my partner. Weeks later, we were sitting together at the table, talking and having a drink. Out of nowhere, he mentioned feeling uneasy when walking to our room or unlocking the door. I admitted I'd felt the same way but still didn't bring up the shadow I'd seen. Then about 2 weeks ago, something happened that was harder to ignore. I was coming back to our room from the bathroom late at night, probably around 3 a.m. As I walked. The familiar feeling of dread crept over me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a translucent shadow gliding toward me before it vanished. It was about the size of a large dog. My heart raced, but I convinced myself I was just imagining things. It was late, I was tired, and I chalked it up to my drowsy state. Still, the experience stayed with me. I also noticed that I never felt this sense of dread when walking away from our room, only when heading back to it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This morning, something even stranger happened. Around 5 a.m., I woke up because my partner was tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. After cuddling him for a bit, I decided to use the bathroom. The hallway was darker than usual because the light, which our neighbor typically leaves on, was off. I found that odd since he's usually afraid of the dark. I turned the light on and made my way to the bathroom. On my way back, that creeping sense of dread returned. I glanced behind me but saw nothing. As I climbed the steps to our room, the floorboards creaked under my feet, and then I heard it, two sharp, distinct sounds, like claws clicking on the wooden floor. The sound was unmistakable, like a large dog walking and then suddenly stopping. My heart pounded as I froze in place, too scared to turn around. After a moment, I rushed into the room and shut the door behind me. Now it's 6 a.m., and I'm writing this, trying to make sense of what happened. The sound was so clear and vivid, there's no way I imagined it. The only explanation I can think of is that it might be the spirit of a dog, or perhaps something else pretending to be one. I've encountered spirits in many forms before, from human-like figures to ones as small as a mouse, but this experience was different. It's been a long time since anything unusual happened to us, and I'm thankful for that. The past 2 years have been pretty uneventful, but something happened recently that my husband and I still can't explain. We were in Adelaide for the week, staying at the Crown Hotel. We've stayed there several times before without any issues. On this trip, we had a busy day and decided to stay in for the night, relaxing in our room. We watched Bad Boys 2 on TV, and when it ended, my husband suddenly asked, "Where did Satan come from?" He's a new Christian and often asks me questions about God, Christianity, and the devil, so his question didn't surprise me. I explained how Lucifer was once the angel of music and fell from grace. Satisfied with my answer, he held my hand, and I drifted off to sleep. Just as I was getting comfortable, I heard a noise on the balcony. We were on the 12th floor, so I thought it was odd. The room was dimly lit by the glow of the city lights outside. I looked over my husband, who was silent and still, toward the balcony. Seeing nothing unusual, I turned my gaze back to the dark ceiling, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a black shape, a shadow on the ceiling. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the shape began to grow as if it was coming closer. I shut my eyes tightly and turned my head toward my husband. Then I felt it, a warm breath on my left cheek. Slowly, I turned my head back and opened my eyes. The black shape now had a face, and it was just inches from mine. Its eyes were dark red, its face covered in black hair. It was panting, its hot breath heavy against my skin. There was so much hatred in its expression. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to break its intense, piercing stare. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it extend an arm over my husband, pointing toward him. In a low, rolling voice, it snarled, "Look what you've done to him. How dare you try to take him? Look what you've done to him." The moment felt endless, though it could only have been 20 or 30 seconds. Suddenly, I managed to move my hand. I gripped my husband's hand tightly, startling him awake. The creature vanished, leaving me frozen in place, staring blankly at the ceiling and struggling to catch my breath. Then my husband spoke, his voice shaking. "What the asterisk is that?" His grip tightened around my hand. I turned to him and saw him shuffle up the bed, his back pressing against the headboard. The faint city light revealed sheer terror on his face. "What?" I asked. "What are you seeing?" His eyes were locked on something at the foot of the bed. "I just saw something leaning over you," he said, his voice trembling. "It walked in front of the picture to the end of the bed, and now it's up there in the corner of the ceiling. Can't you see it?" I couldn't see anything, but I believed him. He was absolutely terrified. His eyes stayed fixed on that corner of the room, his hands clutching mine. I asked him to pray with me. I knew it was the only way to make it go away. He didn't take his eyes off the ceiling until I touched his cheek, and I saw tears streaming down his face. My husband never cries. I've only seen it happen once in 5 years, but there he was, trembling and crying silently. We prayed together, and after a moment, he said it was gone. The room felt calmer, but neither of us could fall asleep right away. This was the first time my husband had ever seen anything like this. He had always been skeptical of my stories before, but that night changed everything for him. Now, whenever he tells someone what happened, he gets goosebumps. He believes me now. In 2014, my husband and I started taking writing lessons in Box Hill, a rural suburb about 26 miles northwest of Sydney. Once a month, we pack our gear into the car and make the 2-hour drive from our home to the peaceful countryside. Our instructor, Sandy, was a spry woman in her late 60s with a sharp eye for detail and a dry sense of humor. She had years of experience as both a competitor and a judge in equestrian events. One of my coworkers, who had been learning dressage with her, recommended her as a patient and no-nonsense teacher. Sandy had a simple motto when it came to handling horses: be firm but kind. Sandy stabled several horses for other owners on her property, and they often let her use the horses for lessons. Over time, my husband and I learned a lot under her guidance, everything from approaching a horse calmly, to grooming them, to securing a saddle and bridle. Some days, when the horses were restless from the wind, we even practiced tying knots to secure them. Grooming with a currycomb quickly became my favorite part, as the horses seemed to enjoy it as much as I did. I usually rode a red chestnut mare named Jessie. She was gentle and about 15 hands tall, perfect for someone my size. While I loved riding her, I found her trot a bit choppy and struggled to match her rhythm. My husband, on the other hand, always rode Ellie, a large Aussie draft horse with a glossy bay coat. At 19 hands tall, she was enormous, even for him at 6'2". One day, Jessie wasn't available, so we had to share Ellie. For me, riding Ellie felt like moving from a bicycle to a double-decker bus. At just 5'1", I needed a proper mounting block just to climb into the saddle. Her back was so broad, my legs couldn't fully wrap around her sides. I felt a little nervous at first, sitting so high off the ground, but Sandy encouraged me. She held the lunge rope as I started my lesson, guiding Ellie gently around the paddock. Soon I began to relax. Ellie's long, smooth strides felt like sitting in a moving armchair. I closed my eyes and let myself sway with her rhythm, finding a peaceful connection with the horse. Sandy praised my progress, noting that my posture and balance had improved. Coming from her, that meant a lot. When my lesson ended, Sandy asked my husband to help me dismount. For some reason, he stood on the right side of the horse, even though it's standard practice to dismount from the left. I didn't realize he was there, and before anyone could stop me, I swung my right leg over Ellie's back and let go of the saddle. That's when I realized just how far down the ground really was. As I fell, time seemed to slow. A calm voice in my head told me to relax. I took a deep breath and felt my body go loose, almost weightless. It was as if something, or someone, was guiding me. I landed hard on the packed sand, my right shoulder absorbing most of the impact. Before I could even process the fall, I noticed Ellie's massive hooves right in front of my face. Suddenly, I heard a clear and urgent command in my head: "Movie." Without hesitation, I curled into a ball and rolled away. Just a moment later, Ellie's iron-shod hooves stomped down with a loud thud right where I had been lying. Sandy and my husband rushed over, their faces pale with worry. Sandy quickly secured Ellie, while my husband helped me to my feet. My legs were shaky, but everything seemed to be in one piece. My shoulder ached, but I could move it without any trouble. Both of them stared at me in disbelief. "It's a miracle," they said. As I rubbed my sore shoulder, I thought of the old saying, "Pride comes before a fall." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching over me. Whatever it was, I was grateful for its protection that day. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. In the summer of 1989, I was supervising about 30 maintenance technicians for a large Australian telephone company based in Sydney's northern suburbs. Our job was to find, isolate, and fix faults in customer phone lines. It was a logical, methodical process which required clear thinking and no room for anything unexplained. Technicians like us were trained to rely on facts, not flights of fancy. One day, I got an unusual call from one of my technicians. Let's call him Gary. He was having trouble with a faulty phone line at a house in Fairlight, a historic suburb in Sydney's northern beaches. But what caught my attention was Gary's claim. The issue might involve a ghost. A ghost? Normally, I would have dismissed it as a joke, but something about Gary's tone told me he was serious. Intrigued, I decided to join him at the house. The house was an old, two-story structure with the kind of aging wiring that often caused problems. When I arrived, Gary looked uneasy. He said he couldn't find any technical issues but felt as though someone was watching him while he worked. The homeowner, Mrs. Smith, had casually mentioned her resident ghost, whom she called Arthur, and assured Gary it was on its best behavior around visitors. She seemed sharp, witty, and perfectly sane. Still, I wasn't there to discuss ghosts. I was there to fix a phone line. Mrs. Smith explained that the upstairs cordless phone gave her the most trouble, since it needed both a working phone line and power to operate. I decided to replace it as a first step. I promised to follow up the next day. That evening, I reviewed the fault history for the house. There were 5 years' worth of reports, but none showed any detectable issues except one, which had been fixed. Most faults were marked "No Fault Found," NFF. The next day, I returned to find the phone line had gone dead again overnight, though it was working fine by the time I arrived. Mrs. Smith admitted she hadn't reported every outage because it happened so often. Her embarrassment about calling so frequently had left gaps in the record. I replaced the downstairs phone as a precaution and gave her specific instructions to follow if the fault recurred. Check the upstairs phone first, unplug it, test the downstairs phone, and then reconnect the upstairs one. The following day, Mrs. Smith reported that unplugging the phones made no difference. The line stayed dead until it mysteriously came back during the night. I began to suspect the issue might be in the wiring outside the house. Testing confirmed the line was fine when disconnected from the house, but went dead when reconnected. I replaced the connection box where the street cable joined the house wiring. Finally, the line seemed stable. "Arthur must like you," Mrs. Smith joked with a laugh, though her tone suggested she truly believed it. 3 days later, I followed up, and she confirmed there had been no more issues. For months, I heard nothing more about the Fairlight house. I assumed the problem was solved. Then, during a morning tea break, another technician mentioned a haunted house in Fairlight. Apparently, faults were still being reported there, but the work was being reassigned to other technicians. In July 1989, the company underwent major restructuring, and I was relocated. I never returned to Mrs. Smith's house. Years later, when I told my wife about the experience, she insisted we drive by to see the house. That's when she pointed out something I had never noticed before. The house was located at a crossroads. In the summer of 1989, my husband and I went for riding lessons in a small rural suburb in New South Wales, Australia. The place was peaceful, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a warm blanket, except for one unsettling incident that still haunts me to this day. The riding lessons were with Sandy, a patient and witty instructor with decades of experience. On one particular day, I was assigned to ride Ellie, a massive and gentle horse far taller than what I was used to. Ellie and I spent the afternoon trotting around the paddock, her long, smooth strides eventually easing my nervousness. After my lesson, I went to dismount, but something went wrong. I lost my balance, and for a split second, I felt a strange calm before crashing onto the ground, narrowly missing Ellie's heavy hooves. Later, Sandy's comment stayed with me. "It's like something was watching over you." At the time, I didn't think much of it. but the events of that day became the first of many strange moments that led to this story. Years later, clearing out my grandmother's house after her passing, I found myself facing something I couldn't explain. Gran's home was old, creaky, and full of cherished memories. She had a collection of rings, each with a story, and my task was to choose one. As I opened the drawer where the rings were kept, a sudden chill ran through me. The wind howled outside, but inside, I heard voices, familiar and warm. It sounded like Gran and her friends, laughing and chatting, as though having one of her lively dinner parties. The moment was strange yet oddly comforting. But then, things turned eerie. The familiar creak of the floorboards outside her bedroom caught my attention. I froze, recognizing the sound. Someone, or something, was standing there. I didn't need to see to know who it was. My grandfather. I had heard stories about him. A violent, abusive man who left scars on everyone he knew. He had been buried in an unmarked grave, and no one spoke of him fondly. Yet, here I was, feeling his presence as if he had come back to remind us of the darkness he left behind. My chest tightened as I felt him lingering. The jovial voices of my Gran and her friends faded into the background, replaced by an oppressive silence. I quickly grabbed the rein and ran out of the room, convinced he was standing just behind me, relishing my fear. When I reached my mom in the garage, I could barely manage to tell her, "Can't we go?" She agreed, saying she had felt a strange heaviness in the house as well. That night, I dreamed of him. He was standing in the yard, his face yellowed and sunken, with a strange, almost wet sheen. When I later shared the dream with my mom, she went pale. She revealed that's exactly how he looked when she identified his body years ago. The detail shook me. How could I have known that? Thinking back, I can separate the comforting presence of my grandmother from the chilling encounter with my grandfather. I believe Gran and her friends were there that night, perhaps trying to bring warmth to a space that held so many dark memories. But his presence overshadowed it all, as though he couldn't bear to let the light in. Thankfully, I've had no further encounters with him. But that one night gave me a glimpse of the man everyone feared, even in death. A figure whose malevolence lingered, leaving an imprint on a family that fought to move past him. If there's one thing I'm grateful for, it's that his darkness didn't win. During the early 1980s, my parents were close friends with an eccentric couple who owned an old, mysterious house nestled in a forested area. Their home, built sometime between the late 1800s and the 1920s, was the backdrop for many of the peculiar experiences that we kids were fortunate, or perhaps unfortunate, to witness over the years. The house stood on about 2 acres of beautifully maintained Victorian-style gardens. The place had a certain Gothic charm, with its dark, damp pathways, towering trees, and intricate details. The roof boasted gargoyles and a dragon-themed gutter system that spouted water during heavy rains. As a child, I'd walk around the house, fascinated by these decorations, wondering whether the dragon was crawling along the roof or soaring around it. One day, when I was about 4 or 5, I was exploring the front garden near the main pathway, which was surrounded by a dense canopy of maples, magnolias, and birches. While admiring the dragon-themed gutters, I suddenly heard leaves crunching nearby, followed by a single, sharp tap on one of the iron lanterns lining the pathway. Though startled, I chalked it up to animals or a gust of wind, but the strange, uneasy feeling that followed lingered. Around the same age, I had another odd experience while riding a restored pedal car with the couple's eldest daughter, who was the same age as me. As I rolled past one of the bedroom windows, I noticed the curtain twitch as if someone had moved it. The adults were all outside with us, and though it could have been one of their pets, the moment stuck with me. A few years later, when I was about 8, I was standing on the croquet lawn in the backyard. The lawn, elevated and bordered by a large oak tree pruned into cloud-like shapes, offered a perfect vantage point to admire the gargoyles on the house's roof. As I stood there, enjoying the cool breeze created by one of the couple's peacocks landing nearby, I suddenly noticed a man in the distance near the peacock house. He wore an old, dusty orange shirt and beige trousers, leaning casually on what appeared to be a shovel. He smiled at me warmly, but his presence felt out of place. This couple didn't allow strangers on their property, let alone someone working in their yard. Confused, I went inside to ask who he was. The husband and my mother, both intrigued by ghost stories, suggested it might have been the spirit of an old gardener. A search of the yard turned up no one. The house itself was a treasure trove of history, with original features and antique furniture that made it feel like stepping back in time. The couple's dedication to preserving its authenticity might explain some of the unusual occurrences. The husband, a brilliant engineer, restored vintage machines like gramophones and jukeboxes, while his wife crafted vintage-style clothing and lampshades with meticulous skill. Their passion for all things old made their home feel like a living museum. Among the first stories I heard about the house was the recurring sound of footsteps in the hallway. This long, central hallway connected the various rooms and was the heart of the home. Both the front and back doors were located on the sides of the house, with winding paths leading to them. Most guests entered through the back kitchen door, which served as an informal gathering space. The footsteps, as the couple and their guests described, sounded as if someone was following them down the hall. It didn't seem to matter who you were. Sooner or later, everyone experienced it. Even as a child, I listened intently to the adults recount their eerie encounters, wondering what or who might be sharing the house with them. This house, with its unchanging architecture and rich history, seemed to hold onto echoes of the past. Whether these moments were caused by lingering spirits or simply the quirks of an old home, they left a lasting impression on everyone who visited. For me, it was the beginning of a lifelong fascination with the unexplained. In the formal part of the house, the right side front door is grand, with elegant marble steps shaped like lily pads and flanked by marble columns. There's something about the area near this entrance that feels unusual, almost like the marble absorbs sound, leaving it oddly quiet. As a child, I was fascinated by this strange stillness, and even wondered if it connected somehow to the mysterious footsteps that often echoed through the hallway. The house's layout is key to understanding these footsteps. The hallway is long and dimly lit, with dark wood paneling reaching up to the high ceilings. Old-fashioned wall lamps cast a soft glow, giving the space an antique charm. The hallway runs the length of the house in an L shape. On the right side, all the doorways lead to bedrooms. On the left side, glass French doors open to various rooms. The overall ambience is dark, made even dimmer by the heavy trees outside, which block much of the natural light. It feels exactly how you'd imagine a Gothic-style home to be, mysterious and timeless. The French doors on the left lead to several distinctive rooms. The first set opens into a long, formal lounge. The next leads to a billiard room filled with vintage charm. The third set belongs to the ballroom, a large space with an elevated stage at one end and a high, domed ceiling adorned with intricate Victorian details. A grand chandelier hangs in the center, completing its luxurious feel. Though we called it a ballroom, it might have been a music room originally. Finally, the fourth set of French doors leads to the dining room. From there, the hallway turns a corner, leading to the kitchen and bathroom, separated by a classic swinging wooden door. The footsteps reportedly start at the front door and make their way slowly down the hallway to the kitchen. In the hallway, near the formal entrance, there used to be a suit of armor, a metallic knight that greeted guests. As a child, I was convinced the knight might be behind the mysterious footsteps. I even imagined it coming to life at night. Over time, the suit of armor was moved to the ballroom, but the footsteps remained. One night, when I was around 6, I experienced something strange with one of my friend's toys, a duck puppet. It was late during one of the couple's many lively parties. While the adults were in the kitchen, my friend and I played in her room and the ballroom. As I walked back to her room, I saw the duck puppet poke its head out from the doorway and wiggle around. I laughed, thinking my friend was playing a trick on me. I ran to catch it, but when I entered the room, she wasn't there. And neither was the puppet. She was still in the ballroom, choosing another song on the jukebox. When I told her what had happened, we both searched her room but couldn't find the duck. Just as we were processing this, the jukebox started playing, startling us and sending us running to the kitchen for comfort. Later that night, when it was time to leave, I followed my parents into the nursery where my baby brother had been sleeping. To my surprise, the duck puppet was sitting on a chair near the door. My friend and I hadn't been in that room all evening, and neither of us had put it there. I've often wondered if the nursery, and perhaps my brother, who was sleeping in a cradle passed down through their family, had something to do with the duck's strange behavior. The French doors in the hallway have always been fascinating. At night, looking through the glass panels, you sometimes catch reflections that don't quite belong. It's not just your own reflection. It's as if scenes from another time are playing out. Once, while in the billiard room, I saw the faint image of a young woman through the doors, wearing what looked like a white bonnet and leaning over a table in the dining room. Another time, I glimpsed a man leaning casually in a doorway, laughing and holding a cigar or cigarette. Not all of these figures seemed like reflections. Once I saw a man standing by the fireplace in the lounge. He had his arm resting on the mantel and was smiling down, as though looking at a child or pet. When I moved to get a better look, he vanished. It was eerily similar to the man I'd seen years earlier in the garden, leaning on a shovel. The couple has always had dogs, and they seem to sense something unusual about the house. Without warning, the dogs will start barking frantically, running inside and outside as though searching for something. They often appear confused, as if they can't decide what they're reacting to. It's a regular occurrence, one that nobody has ever been able to explain fully. As I grew older, I had my own direct encounter with the footsteps. It was late afternoon, and I had left the ballroom to grab something. As I walked down the hallway, I suddenly realized I wasn't alone. Footsteps were following me. When I stopped, they stopped, just a beat behind. When I started walking again, they resumed, as if mimicking my movements. The sound trailed off near the front door, leaving me both spooked and thrilled. This house holds so many layers of mystery, and every visit seems to reveal something new. Whether it's the faint sound of footsteps, a sudden reflection that doesn't belong, or an old toy that seems to move on its own, the atmosphere here is unlike anywhere else. It's a place that feels alive with stories, some of which remain untold. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a new house, and it was there that I first noticed a man I now call the Dancer. For years, this man passed by our home on foot, and though he seemed ordinary at first, certain details about him became more and more curious over time. He was a small, neatly dressed man, always in a dark suit and white shirt, carrying a briefcase. His hair was thick and sandy blonde, and he wore glasses. What stood out most about him was his walk. It was brisk and purposeful, as if he was always in a hurry. We'd spot him at least once a week, sometimes more often, always in the late afternoon or early evening, usually between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. At first, I didn't think much of him. He seemed like a commuter walking home from the station. But over time, I began to notice strange things. For one, he was always in the same outfit, no matter the weather. On one especially hot summer day, I watched him pass our house in his full suit, walking at his usual quick pace. I couldn't imagine how he wasn't overheating, or at least taking off his jacket. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. We also saw him along other parts of his route, always heading in the same direction as though walking home. Our house wasn't close to the station, and there were bus routes that made the walk unnecessary. It seemed he chose to walk deliberately, perhaps for the exercise. Still, the regularity of his appearance and his unwavering outfit seemed peculiar. One summer evening around 1999, my mother and I were standing outside looking at the stars. It was late, about 11 p.m., when we spotted him again. He turned down a street past our house. Mom remarked that she'd never known exactly where he went after passing our place. She worried a bit about him walking so late, especially near the station where troublemakers sometimes hung out. Even then, nothing seemed too unusual, though it was the latest we'd ever seen him. The most baffling moment happened a year later, near our letterbox. I was standing there when he came around the corner, walking at his usual pace. As he passed, I greeted him casually, and he gave me a polite hi in return. I noticed something unsettling in that brief exchange, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then, as I turned to head up the driveway, I realized he was gone. He should have been right in front of me, but he wasn't. The embankment was too dense for him to have disappeared into, and there were no visible places to hide. It didn't make sense, but I didn't panic, just wondered where he could have gone. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I kept seeing him on his usual route, and his presence became stranger each time. His clothes never changed. He never aged. It was as though time didn't touch him. I began to question if he might be a ghost, though I couldn't figure out why a ghost would follow such a rigid routine. If he was just a residual haunting, why did he acknowledge me that day? Over time, I noticed even more odd details. I never actually saw him cross a road, though he must have, as his route required it. Our house was bordered by a thick row of trees, and by the time he reappeared beyond our property, he was always on the opposite side of the street. It seemed he crossed somewhere hidden by the trees, but I never saw it happen. One day, I caught sight of him at the station car park. He was walking away from the station, heading toward his usual route. That confirmed, at least in my mind, that his path started there. But I never saw him at the station itself or anywhere else before it. It was like his existence began and ended on that path. My family has always been sensitive to the paranormal, and one of my younger brothers, Luke, seems to be especially tuned into things most people can't see. Because of this, he's always hated hospitals. This story started when my 4 brothers and I were still living at home. Luke used to wake up in the middle of the night to hear a little girl laughing and running around in the living room. It happened frequently, but after the oldest of the boys, John, moved out, the laughter stopped. John's life took a turn for the worse after he left. He fell into heavy drug use, which led to paranoia and hearing voices. I moved out too, to a different town, got married, and had 2 beautiful children. One weekend, John came to stay with us. He was trying to recover from his addiction, and I wanted to help him get back on his feet. That's when he told me something that chilled me. He believed there was a little girl in his house. He described her as having long, dark hair and wearing a red dress. She always seemed to appear when he was depressed or angry. I advised him not to interact with her. I told him to say a prayer whenever he saw her or to tell her calmly to move on if she didn't seem threatening. During John's visit, we were in the middle of packing up to move to a new house. All the kids' toys were switched off, packed in boxes, and stacked under the stairs. Late one night, while John and I were the only ones awake watching a movie, we suddenly heard my son's train set start playing music. I figured I had forgotten to turn it off. When I went to check, I had to pull the box out from under several others. The train was still playing as I retrieved it, but as soon as I got it out, the music stopped. I checked the switch, and the toy was turned off. A chill ran through me. I said a quick prayer under my breath, put the train back, and returned to the living room. The next night, we were sitting in the living room eating dinner when John started talking about how he hadn't seen the little girl for a few days. Just as he said this, a photo frame flew off the wall. The frame's hanger had snapped, which was strange since it had been securely hanging in the same spot for over a year. We brushed it off and focused on our upcoming move. That was 3 months ago. About 2 weeks ago, Luke called me. He said he'd been seeing what looked like a shadow figure with glowing red eyes. It had been appearing for about a week. Luke said it didn't feel threatening, so he ignored it at first. But one night he woke up to find it sitting on his bed. Another time, it was perched on his computer chair when he finished work. Around the same time, John suffered a mental breakdown and ended up in the hospital. While John was outside having a cigarette, Luke happened to walk past him on his way to see our parents. What Luke saw sent chills through him. He said there was a young girl walking behind John, her hand resting on his shoulder. She had long dark hair and wore a torn dark dress. At first, she was smiling, But when she noticed Luke could see her, her expression changed. Her smile turned wicked, and she growled at him. When John was told about this, he wasn't disturbed. Instead, he said he was happy she was back because he had missed her. Luke, on the other hand, was deeply unsettled. He went home that night, put on both of his cross necklaces, and started praying every night. He was convinced the girl wasn't something good. After John was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, my parents had him stay at their place for the night. That's when something else strange happened. When my grandmother passed, she left my dad 3 old wind-up clocks. They hadn't worked in years, and despite my dad's efforts to repair them, they remained broken and were stored in a cupboard in the garage. That night, my parents were startled by a commotion coming from the garage. When they investigated, they found all 3 clocks chiming. The next day, John returned to his own house, and since then, my family hasn't reported any further strange occurrences in their home. It's been a while since my last story, but life has a way of keeping us busy. This tale takes place 5 years after the events I shared about the New Farm ghost, and it's one that's stayed with me ever since. It was May of 1984, just after I'd turned 19. My father, my younger brother Robert, and I, along with my father's drinking buddies Kevin and Jonathan, moved into a rental house in the Brisbane suburb of Norman Park. The house was a high-set Queenslander, perched on stumps about 15 feet above the ground, and built around 1900. For once, it felt like we found a decent place to live. Unlike the rundown homes we'd stayed in before, this one was clean, well-maintained, and airy. My room was part of a converted veranda at the front of the house. It had large windows that offered a lovely view of the street, and I quickly made it my own, decorating it to suit my tastes. Life seemed good, at least for a few weeks. Then the strange events began. I've always been particular about keeping things in order. Everything has its place, and I make sure to put items like my wallet and keys on my bedside table every time. One afternoon, while working on a model airplane, I decided to take a break and head to the local shop for snacks. But when I went to grab my keys, they were gone. I checked my jeans pockets, retraced my steps to the bathroom, and even looked under the bed. Nothing. Frustrated, I returned to my room, and there they were, sitting right next to my wallet, exactly where I'd left them. I brushed it off and went on my way, thinking it must have been my mistake, but this wasn't the last time it happened. Over the next few weeks, my keys kept disappearing and reappearing in the same spot. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but then it started happening with my modeling tools too. No matter what went missing, it always turned up right where I had left it. By then, I was beginning to suspect something unusual was going on. One Friday night, I was watching music videos on Rage, sitting on the couch with Kevin's little dog, Toho, lying at my feet. It was late, about 1 a.m., and the house was quiet. Suddenly, Toho jumped up, his hackles raised, and started growling toward the dining room and kitchen, which were shrouded in darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. Following Toho's gaze, I saw a dark shadow shaped like a person move from the dining room into the kitchen. My heart pounded as I leaped from the couch and rushed to the kitchen, flipping the light on. The room was empty. The windows were locked, and nothing was out of place. Shaken, I turned off the light and hurried to my room, Toho close on my heels. Not long after that, I had another unsettling experience. One night I got up to use the bathroom. As I stood there, half asleep, I noticed the toilet brush and its holder start swaying. At first, it moved slowly, but then it began swinging faster and faster, like a maniacal pendulum. I froze, watching in terror, until it suddenly stopped. Heart racing, I bolted back to my bed and dove under the blankets. The next morning, I confided in Kevin, who admitted he'd seen the same thing. He also told me his dresser drawers had been opening on their own. Weeks passed with minor incidents. A misplaced item here. A strange feeling of being watched there. But one night, as I lay in a sleeping bag on the lounge room floor, something else happened. It was around 2 a.m., and I was watching rage again when I heard loud knocking at the front door. The pounding was relentless. I jumped up and rushed to open it, expecting to see a friend or neighbor. But when I flung the door open, no one was there. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. The house sat high on stumps, and the only way down was a long flight of stairs. Yet the knocking had been real. The house seemed to calm down after that. No more loud knocks or moving brushes, just the occasional missing object. Then, out of the blue, my father announced we were moving to a bayside suburb. It was unusual for him to break a lease, especially since it cost money he'd rather spend on drinking. I couldn't help but wonder if he'd experienced something he wasn't willing to admit. After the move, I asked my younger brother if he'd noticed anything strange in the old house. He said no, but I was glad I hadn't brought it up while we were still living there. He was only 11 and might not have handled it well. When I was 6, we moved into a new house after living with my grandma for a while. It was a spacious place on a nice block of land that backed onto bushland, with a quiet cul-de-sac street that seemed perfect for kids like my siblings and me to play safely. The neighborhood kids, however, wasted no time in trying to spook us. They would ride by on their bikes and say our house was haunted. At first, we shrugged it off as harmless teasing, just kids being kids. Our house was roomy, but my parents wanted to make it even better. They had plans to renovate the double-port garage into a larger room that could eventually be split into 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for my older brother. But like many renovation projects, it took longer than expected, and the dividing wall never happened. So my brother and I ended up sharing the converted garage space, which was much bigger than our previous room. It seemed like an upgrade at first, but that's when things started to change for me. I had always been the youngest, the baby of the family, and a little dramatic at times, but I was never truly scared of the dark or the idea of monsters. That all changed after we moved into that larger room. Almost as soon as we settled in, I started having vivid, terrifying nightmares, demonic and intense. I dreaded going to sleep and began to feel uneasy any time I was alone in the room. Waking up from these nightmares was even worse. I would see strange visions, hear voices, and feel an overwhelming sense of fear. There were periods when I refused to sleep in the room altogether, dragging my pillow and blanket to the living room where I could sleep soundly. My parents would pray over the room and convince me to return, but the cycle would start again. This went on for years, well into my teens, and my brother endured it all patiently. What disturbed me most was the sense that whatever was haunting me wasn't just one thing. It felt like multiple entities were in that space. 2 particular encounters stand out vividly in my memory. One night, I awoke from a nightmare in which I was being dragged to hell from my bedroom and down the hallway. In the dream, I was screaming for my family, but they couldn't see or hear me. When I woke up, I wasn't screaming right away. Instead, I felt strange, like I was still trapped in some surreal state. At the end of my bed, I saw a crouched figure in front of my wardrobe. Thinking it was my mom putting away laundry late at night, I called out, "Mom." The figure stood, turned toward me, and walked to the foot of my bed. It had no face, just a blank, featureless surface. It stared at me briefly, then turned and walked through the door. Another encounter happened when I was about 14, not long before the strange experiences stopped. I woke up for no apparent reason and found myself staring at the ceiling. Hovering above me was a figure. Its head was over my chest, and its body hung at a perpendicular angle to mine, as if defying gravity. The figure wasn't facing me. It was looking upward, waving its arms slowly in the air. I panicked, leaped out of bed, and the figure vanished. My parents, though supportive, tried not to entertain my experiences too much. They didn't want to encourage my imagination. My brother also tried to remain skeptical, but the stories about our house didn't stop there. Even after we became friends with the neighborhood kids, they stuck to their claims about the house being haunted. Neighbors had heard stories too, like the one about a house painter who quit the job because his tools kept mysteriously moving. Eventually, I started digging into the history of the house myself. What I found sent chills down my spine. A previous tenant had died in the garage, my room. He had been working on his car when the jack failed, and the car crushed him. My bed was positioned right where the car would have been parked if the garage were still intact. Adding an eerie twist to it all, my bed was shaped like a car. Even now, I look back on those years with a mix of fear and fascination. Whether it was the house, the history, or just my overactive imagination, something about that room will always stay with me. When I was 11, I went through a phase where I became obsessed with watching ghost hunter shows with my parents. I wanted to prove I was brave, so I'd spend entire afternoons and weekends watching them. But eventually, they scared me so much that I couldn't sleep at night. Every little noise or draft would send shivers down my spine. Around this time, my family was moving to a new house. Our old house had a bit of history. The previous owner had passed away there, but I was convinced that our new house might be haunted too. It was a newer home, but my paranoia from watching all those shows had me suspicious of everything. Even as I grew older and left that phase behind, I occasionally wondered if I had just let my imagination get the better of me. Last year, for some reason, I found myself falling into that same obsession again. This time, I started noticing strange things happening in my room. My bedroom door would close by itself, and my light would sometimes turn on without explanation. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe there was a draft, or maybe I'd forgotten to turn the light off. But as it kept happening, I began to realize that there were no drafts, and I was absolutely sure I had double-checked the light switch. The strange events became so frequent that I started to accept the idea that there might be something supernatural going on. Oddly enough, it all seemed to focus on me and my room. When I mentioned it to my parents and siblings, they said nothing strange had happened anywhere else in the house. This made me feel like whatever it was might be attached to me. For a while, I just ignored it. I figured that dwelling on it would make it worse. But things escalated in late November, shortly after my granddad tragically passed away. His death hit my family hard. He was deeply loved, and losing him was devastating. Around this time, the activity in my room became even more intense. It wasn't just the door and light anymore. I started seeing shadowy figures and dark shapes moving around. Sometimes, I'd hear faint whispers or even my name being called. It was unsettling, but somehow I got used to it and tried not to let it bother me too much. In December, I learned about using sage to cleanse a space. I thought it might help with the anxiety I've been struggling with since the start of the year, so I decided to give it a try. After burning the sage and cleansing my room, my anxiety eased and the strange events stopped completely. I felt relieved and began to think I had found a solution. That peace didn't last long. A few weeks later, during exam break, something truly unsettling happened. It was about 1 a.m, and I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep. Suddenly, I heard my younger brother laughing. His room is right next to mine, and he sleeps with his door open, so I could hear him clearly. At first, it was just a soft giggle, and I thought he might be laughing in his sleep. But then his laughter grew louder, full-blown hysterical laughter. Concerned, I got up and walked into his room. I stood by his bed and gently asked if he was awake. It was dark, and I couldn't see him clearly, but I could tell he was awake because he responded with a soft "yeah," and then started laughing again. I asked him what he was laughing at, and he pointed at his door and said that. I turned to look at the door, but there was nothing there, just the faint light from the bathroom window shining on it. Now I was scared. My brother kept laughing, and before I could say anything else, my dad came in to see what was going on. He didn't take it seriously and just told my brother to go back to bed. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I asked my brother about it. He didn't remember laughing or pointing at anything. That scared me even more because I clearly remember his eyes being open and him looking around the room as if he was awake. After that night, nothing similar happened to my brother, but I've been hesitant to cleanse my room again. I'm afraid that whatever is in my room might move on to him or my other siblings. Although the activity in my room has quieted down, occasional shadows and my light turning on by itself, it hasn't stopped entirely. My mom, who has recently become more open to the idea of ghosts, thinks it might be my granddad's spirit watching over us. But I haven't told her that the strange events started before he passed away. I've also had experiences with his spirit at my grandma's house. Things like lights flickering and appliances turning on by themselves. Things he used frequently when he was alive. Whatever is in my room hasn't harmed me or been aggressive, so I've learned to live with it. But I can't help worrying about my siblings and hoping that whatever it is stays confined to my space. For now, I'm just trying to coexist with it. When I was 17, something strange started happening to me. My name is Shelley, and I live in Australia. This isn't the first time I've shared a story like this, but this one still baffles me. It all began last year after my great-grandfather passed away. He lived far from where I did, and I hadn't seen him since I was about 5 years old. While it was sad, I wasn't deeply affected by his passing because I didn't really know him. But not long after, unusual things started happening, like the strange incident with my cross necklace that went missing and then mysteriously reappeared. I've written about that before, but this story is about something else entirely, the whistling. The first time I heard it was shortly after my great-grandfather passed. It was late at night, and I was in my room when I distinctly heard 2 short whistles. It was faint but clear enough to feel like it came from a man. I thought about it and remembered that my dad had told me a story about hearing tapping on the walls after his father passed away. For him, it was like his dad was sending a message. At first, I wondered if the whistle could be from my dad's father, someone I'd never met. But the sound felt oddly familiar, like I'd heard it before my great-grandfather's passing. That's when I became sure it couldn't have been him. Still, the whistling unsettled me. The sound would come and go. I'd hear it some nights and not others. It was always short, just 2 quick whistles, but it felt deliberate, like it wasn't just some random noise. For months, it stopped altogether, and I didn't think about it much. But then, one night, it came back. I was in bed with the lights off, reading a book on my phone, when I heard it again. 2 short whistles. My heart raced. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. Terrified, I eventually ran to get my little brother so I wouldn't have to sleep alone. The next night, I had a friend stay over. She likes sleeping with the door shut, which I don't usually do, but I didn't mind. I left the TV on and kept my electric fan running for background noise, which is how I usually sleep. Around 4 a.m., I woke up for no particular reason. I picked up my phone and started scrolling, trying to get sleepy again, when I heard it. At first, I thought the sound was coming from the TV, but it didn't match anything that was playing. The noise was unmistakable. Someone was whistling. It wasn't like the short whistles I'd heard before. This time, it was continuous, with pauses here and there, like the person was taking a breath. There was no rhythm or pattern to it, and it would stop for a while and then start again with short or long whistles. I was frozen. My heart pounded as I listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It was different this time, longer, more deliberate. I couldn't brush it off. I woke my friend, and as soon as she stirred, the sound stopped. That's when I felt truly scared. Was this really one of my grandparents? If it was, why would they do something that frightened me so much? This isn't the first time I've heard the whistle, and it's been happening for years, long before my great-grandfather passed away. But why does it come and go? Why did it feel so different this time? Could it really be a relative, or is it something else entirely? And if it's meant to be a comforting presence, why does it feel so unsettling? I've thought about telling my parents, but they'd probably think I'm making it up because I watched a scary movie or something. But this happens when I'm not even thinking about ghosts, just sitting quietly, reading, or scrolling on my phone. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About a year ago, something happened that I still can't explain, and it wasn't the first time something strange like this occurred. It was a late morning, around 10:30 a.m., and I had just woken up and started my usual routine. After freshening up, I went into the kitchen to unstack the dishwasher, which is a chore I always pair with music. Silence just doesn't cut it for me when I'm doing housework. I need music to keep me going. With my phone playing some of my favorite songs, I got to work. One of the tracks came on, and it was one of those songs that just makes you want to go wild. So naturally, I started to dance. I was jumping around, headbanging, and letting loose. I wasn't holding back, just having fun while getting the job done. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. Laughter. A deep, male laugh, full of amusement. It wasn't muffled or distant. It was clear and distinct, like someone was sitting right there in the room with me. The sound made me freeze. No one was home. My mom and stepdad were at work, and my younger brother was at school. The TV wasn't on, and the laughter definitely wasn't coming from the music playing on my phone. It sounded like it came from the dining area, just a few steps away from where I stood in the kitchen. We have an open-plan kitchen, dining, and living space, so I could easily pinpoint where the sound came from. My gaze darted to the dining table, and my heart raced. One of the chairs, the one closest to the wall, wasn't pushed in. That's how it had been left the night before, but now it felt like someone, or something, had been sitting there. The laughter seemed to come from that exact spot. The room felt colder all of a sudden. I stood there, staring at the chair, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. For a moment, I thought it might have been the neighbors. We used to have a family next door, and we could sometimes hear their kids through the walls. But then I remembered, they were out that day too. I'd heard them leaving earlier in the morning. Feeling unnerved and unsure of what to do, I turned down the music and grabbed my headphones. It felt safer somehow to keep the sound closer, blocking out the eerie quiet of the house. I finished the rest of my chores that day without incident, but the laughter lingered in my mind. Ringwood Lake is a well-loved park in the Melbourne suburb of Ringwood. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, if you visited the lake, chances are you'd notice the black swan. Nobody seemed to know where it came from. My parents thought someone might have left it there, but I always doubted that. It felt like the swan simply belonged. It was the only one of its kind at the lake, and for a good 10 years of my childhood, it was a familiar presence. The park itself was massive and beautiful. The lake was wide, surrounded by natural greenery. Back then, it felt untouched, like nature took care of itself. I haven't been there in over 25 years, but I hope it still holds that charm. We started visiting the lake a lot when I was young. Then, in 1990, we moved to Ringwood, and trips to the lake became even more frequent. On one side, there was a large playground shaded by trees, complete with BBQ areas, picnic tables, and shelters. A small pier stretched into the lake, and further down, there was a formal lawn area surrounded by tall trees. Beyond that was a bush trail that led to another playground. On the opposite side of the lake, the landscape was wild and overgrown, with weeping willows dipping into the water and grand old trees creating a natural haven for wildlife. This side always felt more mysterious and alive to me. The lake became like a second home to us. While most kids loved the playground, I was drawn to nature. I spent hours exploring the trees and wandering around the water. Summers brought people to swim in the lake, especially near the shallow section by the pier. But even though I loved the water, I'd never gone in, until one particular summer day. I was obsessed with the swan, convinced I could tame it. That day, the swan was across the lake, near the willows, away from all the noise and people. I thought if I got into the water, maybe I could coax it over for a closer look, maybe even a pat. When I asked my mom if I could go into the lake, she gave me the kind of answer only my unconventional mom would. Yeah, but don't go in too deep. So, without a second thought, I kicked off my shoes and waded in, fully clothed. Why bother with swimming gear when you have parents like mine? Somehow, I felt sure I could get that swan to come over, and to my surprise, I did. I stepped into the water until it reached my chest, about 15 or 20 feet from the shore. I started lightly slapping the water and calling to the swan, much like you'd call a dog. At first, it just watched me. People around the lake started to notice, and I could hear murmurs and laughter, but I stayed focused. Slowly, the swan began swimming toward me. When it got close, I realized how much bigger it was than I'd imagined. At chest-deep water, the swan's head was a foot above mine. It was an intimidating sight. I extended my hand cautiously, but it was clear the swan expected food. Its red and white bill looked a lot sharper up close than it did from a distance. I can't remember if I ever managed to pat it, but I do recall swimming around with it for a while. It followed me closely, almost like it didn't want me to leave. I started to worry about how I'd get back to shore without upsetting it. The swan wasn't aggressive, but being that close was unnerving. I decided to swim toward the pier, thinking I could slip under it and get away unnoticed. But the swan wasn't fooled. As I reached the pier, I noticed someone standing there. They were fully dressed, unlike most of the people by the lake. I only caught a glimpse of their shoes and trousers before I looked back at the swan. When I glanced up again, the person was gone. It was strange, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. Some older kids jumped into the water nearby, splashing noisily. The commotion seemed to annoy the swan, and it swam back to the willows. Relieved, I climbed out of the lake, soaked but triumphant. My clothes dripped everywhere as I walked back to my mom, who watched the whole thing like it was perfectly normal. Other parents weren't as amused, throwing us disapproving looks. But I didn't care. I'd done it. I'd tamed the black swan. Last night, I dreamed about that day. I hadn't thought about it in years, let alone dreamed about it. In the dream, I was in the water again, near the pier. This time, the weather was dark and overcast, and the park was empty. I looked up and saw my guardian standing on the pier, watching me. He didn't say anything, but his calm presence felt reassuring. I suddenly realized it had been him that day at the lake. It all made sense. Waking up, I felt a sense of comfort. Lately, life has been full of family drama, and it's been hard to feel grounded. That dream reminded me of who I am and why I need to stay strong. It was a message, I think, to reconnect with that part of myself from those days at Ringwood Lake. The black swan, the guardian on the pier. It all feels like pieces of the same puzzle, reminding me to keep going. The year was 2007, and it was October. My younger brother was throwing his epic 21st birthday party, the kind of celebration only a group of hardcore metalheads could dream up. Picture this: a suburban house in Australia packed with headbangers dressed in black, wearing pentagram necklaces, and screaming out heavy guitar riffs. It was loud, chaotic, and as my brother described it, epic. Our mom, however, had put her foot down that year. Not here again, she declared, so the party moved to a friend's place, specifically Elle's dad's house. Elle's dad had kindly offered up his home since he'd be out of town. Of course, my parents were tasked with keeping an eye on things to make sure nothing got too out of hand. Despite the wild energy, metalheads tend to be a polite bunch, and the night unfolded without incident. But that didn't mean it was ordinary. I arrived at the house with my stepmom, who's the most skeptical, no-nonsense person I know. We get along well, but she's always rolling her eyes at anything remotely supernatural. As we walked up the long gravel driveway toward the elevated house, I noticed something odd. The floodlight by the stairs cast a bright glow, but as I stepped onto a patch of brick paving, I felt something. It was like I was being greeted. I stopped and glanced down, puzzled. My stepmom asked what I was doing, and I muttered something about a stone in my shoe before hurrying up the stairs. The party was in full swing. Loud music blasted through the house, and metalheads were everywhere, headbanging, laughing, and shouting over the music. The house itself was stunning, rustic, with handcrafted glass panes and artwork that Elle said her dad had made. It felt like stepping into an old Viking lodge. At one point, my dad decided to call Elle's dad to thank him for hosting the party. Being the chatterbox he is, their conversation stretched on for nearly an hour. Dad took the call outside where it was quieter, leaving the rest of us inside. It was then that I noticed a woman. She looked like she'd stepped out of the late 80s or early 90s, with wavy blonde hair, high-waisted stone-washed jeans, and a loose white t-shirt. She stood out, not just because of her retro style, but because it was a freezing night and she was wearing short sleeves. I watched her follow some people out the door, catching only her profile and the back of her head. I didn't recognize her and wondered who she was. Later, the iconic Motorhead song Ace of Spades came on, and the whole party gathered for a rowdy, headbanging sing-along. It was a unifying moment, everyone shouting and laughing. In the middle of the chaos, I leaned back to catch my breath and spotted the same woman again. She was standing quietly off to the side, against a wall, watching the scene with a small smile. When I caught her eye, she smiled at me as if sharing a private joke. That's when it hit me. She might be a ghost. Later, as I wandered the house, I came across family photos displayed on a wall. There she was, the woman from earlier, her image frozen in time in those older pictures. She didn't appear in any recent ones. I didn't say anything to anyone, but I felt certain now about who, or what, I'd seen. When the party started winding down around 3 a.m., my stepmom and I decided to leave. As we walked back down the driveway, I reached the same patch of brick paving. That same feeling from earlier returned, only stronger. I stopped and turned toward a patch of garden nearby, drawn to it without knowing why. I didn't see anything, but I felt compelled to smile and wave. It felt like saying goodbye to someone I couldn't see. My stepmom, oblivious, kept walking ahead. The next day, I told my mom and brother about the woman. My mom hadn't noticed her, but my brother's face lit up. "Yes, you saw Elle's mom," he exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. He explained that Elle's mom had passed away years ago, but her presence was still felt in the house. The patch of bricks I had stopped at was special. It included one that Elle and her mom had made together. My brother said it held deep meaning for their family. He shared a bit more about Elle's mom and the inexplicable, but always positive, things that happened around their home. Back in the early 1980s, my family lived in a cozy neighborhood in Australia, and right across the street were some wonderful neighbors who quickly became close friends with my parents. My family stayed in that house throughout the 1970s and into the 80s, and I have many fond memories of our time there, except for one unnerving detail. Our neighbor's home was beautiful and inviting, but their lounge room always gave me an eerie feeling I couldn't shake. The room itself was stunning. Polished wooden floors, creamy walls, and elegant furnishings, with delicate vases and ornaments proudly displayed on the mantel. Yet the moment I stepped into that room, I was overwhelmed with fear and an intense desire to leave. What made it stranger was the inexplicable green hue that seemed to fill the room whenever I entered. It was like the room had been tinted with an unnatural, glowing green. The feeling only intensified as my fear grew. Sometimes, it seemed like stepping through the doorway was crossing into a world already painted in this eerie color. But if I stood outside the room looking in, the green wasn't there. Thankfully, we mostly spent our time in their kitchen, backyard, or porch, so I didn't have to enter the lounge very often. But on rare occasions, my curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, the TV was on, playing The Munsters, one of my favorite shows. A few people were gathered in the lounge watching it, and I figured the presence of others and the sound of the TV would keep the green hue from returning. I cautiously stepped inside, aiming for an armchair. But as soon as I entered, the green overtook the room again, and this time, something new happened. Sound began to fade. It felt like the world was being muted, and it only stopped when I backed out of the room. From the doorway, the green vanished, and the sounds of the TV and laughter returned. For years, I brushed off these memories as childhood imagination, until recently, during a family conversation. It turned out that the house had a grim history I hadn't known at the time. I'd always heard about a murder that had happened somewhere on our street, but I thought it was in a house farther down the road. My parents corrected me. The murder had happened in that very house, in the lounge room that had always felt so wrong to me. Here's what I learned. In the early 1970s, a local real estate agent, who, ironically, the street was named after, had a dark and twisted motive. After losing money in a shady deal with an accountant, the agent disguised himself as a woman to abduct the accountant's wife. Witnesses saw the woman leaving with her, assuming it was someone she knew. Tragically, she was never seen alive again. The realtor later confessed to the crime but refused to reveal where he'd hidden the body. He eventually took his own life, leaving her family and the community in agony. Years later, in the mid-1970s, a friend of my father's moved into that house. Late one night, he noticed something strange about the floorboards in the lounge room. They looked uneven, as if they didn't belong. Curious, he and his friends decided to investigate. When they pried up the floorboards, they found her, a hand sticking up from the soil beneath the house. The police were called, and the discovery confirmed what many had feared. The body of the accountant's wife had been hidden there all along. When my parents told me this, my memories of the green room suddenly made a lot more sense, but they also left me with even more questions. Why green? Was it tied to the woman's emotions or her spirit? Was she trying to communicate, or was it just residual energy from the trauma? Green is usually associated with healing or calm, but this green was intense and unsettling. It felt alive and heavy, like it had its own presence. Back in 2007, my mother was renting a home where strange things seemed to happen often. By December, things were tense, both in the house and in life. The energy inside the home was heavy, almost oppressive, and it felt like more than one spirit was present. Outside, the garden was alive and thriving, but the atmosphere was unnervingly quiet. Birds were there but weren't singing. The only sound was an occasional distressed call from a blackbird. It felt like something was off. My mom mentioned she'd been experiencing strange noises at night. She called it her furniture-moving ghost. Almost every night after she went to bed, she'd hear sounds of furniture being dragged across the floor in the living room. When I arrived, it didn't take long for me to experience it myself. The first night, I jokingly said goodnight to the ghost, much to my mom's disapproval. That same night, after I turned off my lamp, I heard 3 sharp knocks on the bed frame right next to my head. It startled me, and I had a feeling it was the furniture-moving ghost acknowledging my greeting. Not long after, I heard the unmistakable sound of armchairs and a coffee table being moved around in the living room. I wanted to get up and see, but I was too tired and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told Mom about the knock on my bed. She rolled her eyes and said the same thing had happened to her. Then, later that day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the distinct sound of a chair scraping across the linoleum floor behind me. I turned around but didn't see anything. When I checked later, one of the chairs had been moved to block the laundry door, which was now closed. I put the chair back but couldn't shake the eerie feeling. That night, as I stood in the kitchen deep in thought, I heard a soft click, click, click coming from the laundry door. When I turned, I saw a figure outside the door. It was enormous, with a body covered in hair, claws like a bear's, and a face that looked like a demon. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. It gave off a warm, protective energy. It smiled at me in a way that felt reassuring. I opened the door slightly as a gesture of welcome, and immediately, the tense energy in the house calmed. That night, for the first time, there were no sounds of furniture moving. I told my mom about it, and she admitted she'd heard similar clicking noises outside her bedroom windows. She thought it had been going on for months, but she never connected it to anything paranormal. I believed this spirit had been trying to get inside for a while, perhaps to help balance the chaos. Another vivid experience came during an out-of-body experience I had. I went into the living room and saw a strange figure floating near the ceiling in a corner. It was long and pale, with hair and clothes that moved like they were underwater. I recognized it from a dream I'd had years earlier, where it had appeared outside my mom's house, trying to give me a warning. I now believed this was the furniture-moving ghost. As if that weren't enough, more strange things happened outside. In the backyard at night, I'd often see darting, white, human-like shapes or feel gusts of air brushing past me. The shed was particularly active, with shadows and unexplained movements inside. Once, years earlier, my mom had found flowers arranged in a perfect circle on the shed floor, which she called a fairy circle. Then came the most startling moment, a lynx-like creature. One morning, as I stood in the kitchen, I looked out and saw a large lynx sitting in my mom's dog's bed. It turned its head and looked at me, calm and almost regal. I couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity of it. There are no lynxes in the area, so I guessed it was another nature spirit. The last strange event was a smoke alarm going off in the middle of the night without cause. It happened twice in one night, and 2 days later, a house down the street caught fire. No one was hurt, but it made me wonder if there was a connection. By March, my mom was preparing to move. Though I was sad to see her leave the house, the new place had a much calmer energy. The strange activity stopped, and my mom seemed happy and at peace. Reflecting on everything, I'm still amazed by how much happened in that house. It's something I'll never forget. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This is a story about a real experience that happened to my friend and me some years ago. It's something we've never forgotten, and even now, we occasionally feel like we're being watched by something not of this world. It started on a day when my friend came over for a sleepover. My parents and brother had gone out to town, leaving the house to us. At first, we kept busy outside, but after a while, we got bored and decided to head inside to play a game on the Wii, which was really popular at the time. We played a round of Wii tennis, then took a break to grab some snacks and drinks. After that, we started another round. During the game, I casually mentioned to my friend that I felt like something was watching us from the couch. It wasn't just a passing thought. It felt like a presence. To my surprise, he admitted he'd felt the same thing earlier when we were outside, but he hadn't said anything because he thought I'd think he was imagining things. I suggested we stop playing and go outside. At least there, we feel less trapped if something strange were to happen. As we made our way to the front door, we both froze. The feeling that something was watching us intensified, and we somehow knew whatever it was now right in front of us. We panicked and turned back, racing to the back door, hoping to get outside before it could block us there too. We made it out and ran to the front of the house, stopping by the gate to catch our breath. While we tried to figure out what to do next, we felt it again, that unmistakable presence, this time standing right next to us. We didn't see anything, but we both knew it was there, the same thing that had watched us and blocked us before. Without saying much, we started running again, this time heading farther away from the house. Eventually, we stopped by the driveway gate. My parents and brother pulled up in the car, returning from town. They asked us why we were all the way down by the gate, and we explained what had happened. As expected, they didn't believe us and told us to get back in the car. When we returned home, the strange feeling was gone. The thing, whatever it was, seemed to have left us alone. Since that day, neither of us has experienced anything quite like it again. However, there are still moments when we get that odd sensation of being watched. It's never as intense as that day, but it's enough to make us wonder if it's the same presence or just our imaginations. I've always been sensitive to what many might call the paranormal. My parents have countless stories of me stopping in random places as a child, holding conversations with people who weren't there. Later in life, working in an older, 30-plus years, aged care facility, I encountered more than my fair share of strange experiences. But the only time I've ever been genuinely frightened was when my family and I moved into a townhouse on the Gold Coast, Queensland, in 2014. Almost immediately after moving in, my 2-year-old daughter, Ivy, began talking about someone she called the man. Occasionally, she referred to him as Michael. My younger daughter, Lily, who was just a few months old at the time, seemed to notice him too. She would often fix her gaze on the same empty spots where Ivy was speaking. Although Lily was too young to say anything, her reactions made it clear she saw something unusual. At first, the man didn't seem threatening. He occasionally let me see him too, usually while I was reading Ivy a bedtime story or sitting with her as she fell asleep. Since he wasn't causing trouble, we left things alone. However, after 4 or 5 months, Ivy started to change her tune. She would say things like, "I don't want the man in my room, Daddy. Can you sleep in my bed with me?" That worried my wife and me, but we didn't know what to do. Not long after, I began to suspect the man was trying to push Ivy out of her bed. Ivy is small for her age, sleeps in the middle of a king single mattress, and doesn't move much after falling asleep. Yet, over 3 months, we heard a loud thump followed by her crying as many as 10 times. Once I installed a safety rail on her bed, the fall stopped. But shortly after, objects in her room began to move. They were always things Ivy couldn't reach, like items from the top shelf. These strange occurrences became almost routine until we moved out in September 2015. That's when things escalated. It felt like the man realized we were leaving, and he wasn't happy about it. Small items were thrown across rooms, boxes toppled over, and his overall behavior became disruptive. During the final days, when I was cleaning up after the move, I was often alone in the house. During the day, he was somewhat subdued, though he still caused trouble, like spilling anything that wasn't sealed tightly. But once the sun set, his presence became oppressive. The atmosphere in the house was heavy with negative energy. He even pushed me on several occasions, making it clear he wanted me gone. The last night of cleaning was when he truly terrified me. For context, I'm just under 6 feet tall, weigh 240 pounds, and have 12 years of martial arts training. I don't scare easily, but that night he left me shaken. I arrived at the house around 9 p.m. to finish up a few tasks before heading to my night shift nearby. As I pulled into the driveway, I clearly saw him standing in the window of what had been Ivy's room. When I opened the garage door, the inner door to the house swung open on its own, then slammed shut with force. Inside, his presence was overwhelming. He manifested as a shadowy figure, solid and distinct, 5 or 6 times. He slammed the oven door shut on my arm and tried to push me down the stairs twice. Every moment in that house was filled with a palpable sense of danger. Thankfully, he didn't follow us to our new home. We've been here for 6 months now, and there hasn't been a single unexplained incident. Most importantly, Ivy hasn't mentioned the man even once. Since I was about 14, I've had many strange experiences that seemed paranormal. Some of these happened in the house we used to live in, and others in the house we live in now. Sometimes I wonder if it's just a coincidence that both houses had activity, or if maybe something followed us when we moved. I've heard that can happen. In the first house, there weren't as many experiences, but the place always had a heavy, negative feeling. I never liked it there, not even from the day we moved in. There were also some unlucky events while we lived there, like my mom losing her job and my brother getting mugged. I don't know if these things were connected to the strange energy, but they added to the bad memories of that house. One event stands out that happened to my mom. At the time, my siblings and I spent every other weekend at my dad's house, leaving Mom home alone. On one of those weekends, she was up late using the computer, which was set up on the dining table. She thought she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a young blond boy wearing a blue shirt or sweater standing at the end of the table. When she turned to look, he was gone, but there was a blue can of fly spray sitting there. She assumed her mind had just played a trick on her, but later, when she told some friends, they said she might have actually seen a ghost, a young boy. They thought her mind had tried to rationalize what she saw by connecting it to the blue can. I'm not sure if I believe that explanation, though. We eventually moved out because of the negative vibe and how unhappy we all felt there. The house we live in now feels much better. I like it here, and it doesn't have that heavy, negative energy. Still, there have been a lot more unusual experiences in this house. For example, Mom set up a doorbell when we moved in, but after a while, It started ringing on its own, always at around 3 in the morning. Even after the batteries died, the bell would still go off. It made no sense. Since Mom lost her job, she's been doing bookkeeping from home, so she's often alone during the day. She's told me about hearing footsteps in the hallway, near our bedrooms, when no one else was home. She'd always check, thinking one of us might have stayed home from school, but the house was always empty. She also heard doors slamming for no obvious reason. No drafts, no open windows. A couple of years ago, my grandmother passed away. After her death, Mom kept a few of her belongings, like a recliner chair, a lamp, her walking stick, and a shillelagh. I clearly remember the lamp from when I was little. It was gold with a stained glass shade and one of those touch lamps where you tap it to turn it on or adjust the brightness. One night, Mom was using the lamp while on her computer. She suddenly messaged us, saying, "The lamp just turned itself up." A few minutes later, she messaged again. Now it just turned itself off. A few days later, the lamp stopped working entirely for no clear reason. Some things happened specifically to me, and they all took place in my room at night. These experiences started after my grandmother passed away, but they didn't feel like they were connected to her. In fact, they felt completely different. One time, I noticed that the little ornaments I kept on my dresser were turned around. They usually faced forward, but now they were all facing different directions. It wasn't a one-time thing. It happened more than once. I thought maybe someone in my family did it as a joke, but I couldn't think of why they would. Another night, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, I felt the weight of someone lying down behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I remembered I was alone. The presence didn't feel negative, but it was unsettling. I wondered if it could have been my grandmother, but it didn't feel like something she would do. The most unsettling experience happened when I was sitting at my computer. I heard one of my ornaments fall off the dresser. I thought maybe the curtain had knocked it over, but the window was closed and nothing else could have caused it. When I went to pick it up and put it back, I saw a shadow on the wall. It looked like a person waving their arms above their head. It wasn't a dark figure, just a dull shadow, but it gave me chills. I'm the oldest of 5 kids and the only girl. Growing up, I always seemed to sense things around me, like feelings or vibes in different places. My dad and one of my brothers are the same way. We seem to experience more of these unusual moments than anyone else in the family. When I was little, we lived in the Atherton Tablelands after moving from Townsville. My parents had just bought their first house, and with so many kids, we had to do some quick renovations to make space. The house had 3 bedrooms, so my brothers shared rooms while my parents created a separate space for me. They turned part of an enclosed outdoor area into my bedroom. It didn't have a door, and for some reason, I always felt uneasy at night, especially when lying in bed facing the open doorway. One night I was in bed like usual, turned away from the doorway, when I heard a noise. I rolled over and saw a boy standing there. At first, I thought it was one of my brothers, so I told him to go back to bed. But after a while, I heard the noise again. This time, when I turned to look, I realized it wasn't my brother. What I saw scared me. The boy looked about 8 or 9 years old, with long messy hair like a surfer and wearing jeans and an orange shirt. But his skin looked dark and dirty, and his face was the worst part. His features were hard to make out, like empty shadows. I screamed and ran straight to my mom. When I told her what I'd seen, she stayed calm and explained something surprising. She said that years ago, back when we lived in Townsville and I was just a baby, this same little boy had appeared. She often saw him near me in her bedroom or in the bathroom. He never caused trouble, so she thought he might be some kind of guardian spirit. Her explanation reassured me, and for a while, I didn't worry about it. I'd still see him sometimes, but he never did anything to scare me again. Years later, my mom came home from her job at the hospital with something important to tell me. She asked me to sit down and said a woman she worked with, someone who could communicate with spirits, had asked her an unusual question. The woman wanted to know if our family had Aboriginal heritage. Mom said no, and the woman explained that she had sensed an Aboriginal boy who seemed deeply connected to my mom and me. She said he wasn't dangerous, just very scared and lost. This woman told my mom she had spoken with the boy and learned something heartbreaking. Around the time he first appeared to us, there had been a house fire not far from where we had lived in Townsville. A family had died in that fire, unable to escape. The boy, it turned out, had been separated from his family when they passed. While searching for them, he had come across me and my mom. He had a little sister about my age, and seeing me must have reminded him of her. That's why he stayed so close. The woman asked my mom if she could help the boy move on. What she shared next gave me chills. She said she had spoken gently to the boy, encouraging him to go to the light where his family was waiting. She described seeing his parents and his sister appear to him. As they walked away together, the boy turned back and asked the woman to give us a message. "Tell my mom and sister on earth that I love them." It took me a while to process everything, but after that, none of us ever saw or heard from the boy again. Though I was sad to think of all he had gone through, I felt peace knowing he had found his family. When I was around 19 years old, I had an experience that has stayed with me for over 20 years. It happened at my dad's house, an old Victorian terrace in Sydney's inner west. It's a 2-story brick home, part of a row of 10 houses originally built as workers' cottages for the men who constructed the city's stormwater drains. To understand what happened, it helps to picture the layout. The house is small but cozy. Upstairs there are 2 bedrooms, while downstairs has the main living room where the front door is located. From there, you can see a straight line through an open doorway to the kitchen, down a hallway to the bathroom, and out to the back door. The kitchen has a pantry and a knife drawer near the hallway, and the space feels compact but functional. This particular night was sometime in 1993 or 1994. My dad, my brother Daniel, and I had spent the day fishing and enjoying a good meal together. We all went back to Dad's house, tired and ready to sleep. Dad and Daniel went to their rooms upstairs, while I slept on the pull-out sofa bed in the living room. In the middle of the night, something woke me up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to look down the hallway toward the kitchen. When I did, I froze. Standing there was a figure, a pure black silhouette of a man. He was facing the pantry, standing unnaturally still. Suddenly, he turned his head toward me. Though his face was featureless, I had an overwhelming sense that he was smiling, a cruel, menacing smile. What happened next was even more chilling. He reached out and opened the knife drawer. Slowly, deliberately, he began pulling out a carving knife. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I was paralyzed for a moment, fear gripping me. Then, I jumped up and screamed. My dad and brother came running downstairs, their footsteps pounding on the wooden stairs. As they reached the bottom, the figure vanished before my eyes. I was shaking, trying to process what I'd just seen. I told them what had happened, but my dad shrugged it off, saying, "Hemon mate, it was just a bad dream." For a moment, I almost believed him. But then my brother called us into the kitchen. The knife drawer, the same one the figure had opened, was still wide open. We hadn't used the kitchen that evening. We had eaten out and gone straight to bed when we got home. None of us would leave that drawer open under any circumstances. It would have been an accident waiting to happen in the narrow space. Yet there it was. That night has stuck with me ever since. It wasn't the only strange thing that ever happened in that house, but it was by far the most vivid and unsettling. Even after all these years, I can still recall every detail as if it happened yesterday. In 2004, my grandma passed away. I was heartbroken. We had been very close, visiting each other daily since we lived in the same town. But in early 2007, my family moved 8 hours away, and those visits stopped. Then, in September of last year, I lost my grandpa too. He'd had a series of strokes, the last of which put him in long-term care in 2013, around Easter. Losing them both left a deep void in my life. Their house was a special place, built by my grandparents themselves. It sat high on a hill, overlooking a beautiful marina. The house was open and airy, with big windows and a glass door leading to a long garden my grandma used to love. She was a passionate gardener, and that little patch of earth was her sanctuary. After her passing, though, the garden was neglected. Weeds took over, and it lost the vibrant life it once had. When my grandpa was moved into care, we had to prepare the house for sale to cover the costs. My parents and I traveled back to the town to stay with my aunt and began packing everything up. Being in the house for what felt like the last time was bittersweet. It was just the four of us, my aunt, my parents, and me, and most of the time, they stayed on the patio overlooking the marina. I spent my time wandering through the house, soaking in the memories. One afternoon, I was in the bathroom when I heard something faint but unmistakable, humming. It was a soft, familiar tune, the one my grandma used to hum while cooking or tending to her garden. I froze for a moment, listening closely. The sound was coming from the direction of the overgrown garden. I finished quickly and rushed to check, but as soon as I opened the door to the garden, the humming stopped. The space was empty. I stood there, scanning every corner. There was no one. The only way in or out of the garden was through the door I had just opened. I should have seen someone leaving, but there was nothing, just silence. The whole thing left me shaken. What happened in the days that followed was even stranger. Without any work being done, the garden started to heal itself. The weeds began to wither, and the plants my grandma had lovingly cared for began to grow again. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was enough to notice. When we finally started tending to it, the progress felt almost effortless, like the garden wanted to come back to life. Months later, after my grandpa passed away, something else happened, something I can't explain. I had set up a small stall at a local market, selling a few odds and ends to make some extra cash. My setup was simple, folding tables in front of my car, with the back hatch open so I could sit inside. A few hours into the day, I noticed a man walking nearby. My heart nearly stopped. He looked just like my grandpa, exactly as I remembered him from years earlier. His clothes, his reins, even the tattoos on his hands were the same. He glanced at my direction, and for a moment, our eyes met. He smiled at me, a small, knowing smile, and gave a slight nod. I was frozen in place. It felt surreal, like time had stopped. When he turned to walk toward another row of stalls, I finally snapped out of it and jumped up to follow him. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find him. He was gone. I kept thinking someone else at the market must have seen him. People had walked around him as if he were any other customer. But to me, he wasn't just anyone. He was my grandpa, and he was gone again before I could say a word. I've wondered why these experiences happened to me and not to my parents or anyone else. But maybe it's because I was always the closest to my grandparents. They were a constant presence in my life, even after we moved away. What I do know is that I saw my grandpa, and he saw me months after his death. And I heard my grandma's humming years after hers. I'll never understand how or why, but I carry those moments with me. I love them both so much, and maybe this was their way of letting me know they still love me too. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Kaya, and I live in Western Australia. I've had my own experience with a spirit, and it was both amazing and terrifying. A surreal feeling I'll never forget. Growing up, I was always open to the idea of ghosts and spirits. My mom used to tell me stories about them, which made me curious and open-minded about the possibility. But everything changed after my grandfather passed away when I was about 15 years old. I was very close to my grandfather. He was a big part of my life. After he passed, though, my family started to drift apart from his wife, my grandmother. She remarried her ex-husband, and after some family drama, she cut off contact with us. That's when the strange things began. The first time I noticed something unusual, I was home alone, sitting at the family computer. My back was to an open space, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark male shadow pass by, heading toward my brother's room. I froze, my heart raced, and I got out of there as fast as I could. When my parents came home, I told them what happened. My dad just laughed, but my mom was shocked. She told me she had seen the exact same thing about a week earlier, but hadn't mentioned it because she didn't think much of it at the time. Not long after that, our family TV started turning on by itself. It didn't happen just once. It became a regular thing. I told my parents again, but my dad dismissed it, saying I was overthinking. Things changed when my partner at the time saw the shadow too. We were in the kitchen when he saw it head into the hallway. He turned to me wide-eyed and said, "I believe you now." Later, during a family evening, my dad admitted that he had seen it too, but hadn't said anything because he didn't want us to be scared. From then on, we all knew we had a visitor in the house. Over time, we noticed a pattern. The visits seemed to happen whenever we had any contact with my grandmother. My mom and I joked that it was my grandpa stopping by to keep an eye on us. We even talked to him sometimes, laughing as we did. But it wasn't always funny. One day, my TV remote went missing. I searched everywhere, under the bed, in drawers, behind furniture, but I couldn't find it. I told my mom, half joking, the ghost took my remote. She came to help me look, and we both searched the whole room. Then, as we turned away, something caught our eye. The remote was suddenly sitting in the middle of the floor, in a spot so obvious we couldn't have missed it before. By then, we were used to the little things, like the TV or lights turning on by themselves. But for my 17th birthday, I received a toy sword from a friend. It made sounds when moved, but it had sat quietly in the corner of my room for 2 months. Then, one afternoon, I was cleaning my room. When I lit a candle to finish up, I noticed the flame flickering strangely. The room felt different, almost heavy. I started to feel scared and went to tell my mom. She laughed and said I was being silly. When I went back to my room, trying to shake off the feeling, the sword suddenly went off. It made a loud sound, even though no one had touched it. My body froze and I yelled for my mom. She came into the room, and I told her what had happened. As we stood there, the sword went off again. My mom started to believe me. The energy in the room was like nothing I'd ever felt. It wasn't just fear. It was something else, something almost magical. We sat on my bed, trying to process what was happening. My mom spoke out loud, saying, "If you're here, give us a sign." Right then, the sword went off again. I jumped into her arms, shaking and crying. After that, the feeling in the room suddenly disappeared. The air felt light again, like whatever had been there was gone. My mom could sense the difference too. I've often wondered if that was my grandpa saying goodbye. Maybe he saw how scared I was and didn't want to frighten me anymore. Until 2 years ago, I didn't believe in anything outside the realm of touch, sight, or sound. I didn't believe in spirits, ghosts, or energy without a clear source. I was very rooted in science and chose a career in conservation and land management. Even now, I'm passionate about this path, though my motivations have shifted since my experience. I live in Western Australia and am now 23 years old. This all happened when I was 21. At the time, my brother and I had just moved back into our grandparents' home. My granddad's strength, once legendary to us kids, had faded. He was bedridden, and the entire house seemed to reflect his decline. It wasn't just the lights or the atmosphere. It was the people. Gran, understandably, took it hard, but even my brother and I felt the impact. We started experiencing frequent headaches, and the house felt heavy. I began having a recurring dream. In it, my granddad stood across the road from our old home in Scotland. He was waving at me, wearing a white pinstripe suit. He looked at least 20 years younger than I had ever seen him, and oddly, much heavier than I remembered. Still, I knew it was him. When I was awake, strange things started happening. I'd feel lightheaded moving through the house, like I might pass out. At first, I'd sit down to recover, but one day my brother found me slumped at the table. He told me my eyes had been open, and I'd even turned to look at him, but I wouldn't respond. I had no memory of it. He asked me if I was on drugs, but I wasn't. Even our dog Tubbs seemed to change overnight. His hind legs, which had once effortlessly carried him up the garden stairs, now struggled to lift him at all. At this point, I should mention that I was a healthy, active 21-year-old with no previous health issues. I went to the doctor, had blood tests, and checked my blood pressure. I even inspected the house for gas leaks, trying to find a rational explanation for everything, but nothing turned up. Then on the first day of spring, at 1 a.m., my granddad passed away. We were all with him. I later learned this date loosely aligns with the beginning of Imbolc, a time associated with transitions. After his passing, my strange episodes became more frequent. I told myself it was just grief, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I couldn't understand why the entire family seemed to be experiencing physical symptoms too, or why mine were so much worse. The day before the funeral, I was looking through some of my granddad's belongings to find an item Gran needed. That's when I came across 2 copper torques, one shaped for the wrist and the other for the neck, each with ram's heads at the ends. I remembered seeing him wear the wrist torque before he went into the hospital, but I'd never noticed the matching one for the neck. On a whim, I put them on, and the effect was immediate. A wave of happiness washed over me. I couldn't stop smiling, not because I was recalling a fond memory, but because I felt genuinely and inexplicably happy. I slept with the torques on that night and didn't dream at all. At the funeral, as we all took our seats, a large photo of my granddad was brought in and placed on an easel. I hadn't seen this picture before. It showed him as a young man serving in China in the British forces. He looked exactly as he did in my dream, though he was wearing army fatigues instead of the pinstripe suit. During the service, something strange happened. As I stared at the picture, his expression seemed to change. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he were amused, and then he smiled. A real, human smile. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I was certain the smile was genuine. A video was taken of the service, but I haven't been able to bring myself to watch it yet. I'm afraid of what I might or might not see. Even now, I wear the torques almost constantly. I only take them off briefly, and even then, never for long. I still wonder if what I experienced was real or just a delusion born of grief. Either way, it changed how I see the world. My house has always been a mix of cozy and eerie, with phases of both. This particular incident happened in 2012, when I was 19. I had just come home from a late night with friends. I was driving that evening, so I was completely sober, not that I drink anyway. Next door to us lived Donna, a very unusual woman. She was a full believer in all things spiritual and often shared stories about her experiences. Every Wednesday I'd have tea with her, and she'd tell me about the 3 little children who lived in her house. Donna claimed these children were mischievous, always stealing chocolates and ice cream from the kitchen or making little dents in the bed after she just smoothed the blankets. I never thought much of these stories. While I did believe in spirits, I wasn't convinced about ghosts or poltergeists. That night, as I walked up the driveway we shared, I noticed Donna's lights were on. That wasn't unusual since she worked as a flight attendant and often moved about at odd hours. I made my way through the back door of my house, which led into the laundry room. The laundry room always gave me the creeps. It was cold, the air felt heavy, and I constantly had the sensation of being watched. This eerie feeling only happened at night, never during the day. I usually ran through the space as quickly as I could, and that night was no exception. Just as I closed the door behind me, I heard a high-pitched scream coming from Donna's house. It was full of terror and pain. My heart raced, and I quickly turned on all the lights in my house before calling the police. Later, I learned Donna had slipped on a rug and broken her tailbone. I thought it was strange. How could slipping on a rug cause such a serious injury? The following Wednesday, I visited Donna for tea as usual to check on her. She looked a little worse for wear, but managed to bring out the tea. As she winced and settled into her chair, she began to tell me what had really happened that night. Her version was very different from what I'd been told. She said she woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of the children rummaging in the pantry for food. I mentioned that ghosts couldn't actually eat, and she agreed, saying she didn't understand their obsession with food either. Donna got out of bed to tell them they needed to go to sleep, hoping it would calm them down. She believed this was the only way to make them leave her house, or at least stop bothering her. But instead of listening, they started throwing things from the pantry at her. Flour, sugar, and cans went flying. She told them firmly to stop, threatening to send them away. They obeyed, but she said she could see their footprints in the spilled flour as they walked toward the rug where she was standing. Then she saw something else. A tall, dark figure appeared. His face was shadowed and pockmarked, and he wore a top hat, a heavy coat, and big black boots. Donna said he chuckled low and sinisterly before pulling the rug out from under her with such force that she fell and broke her tailbone. She ended her story by saying, "I felt him in your house, Sarah, in the back part of the house. I think he has unfinished business with the kids or something. He's bad news." I left feeling uneasy. Ever since that day, I've heard heavy footsteps pacing up and down my hallway every Wednesday. Donna eventually moved away due to health problems, but the strange happenings didn't stop. Over the years, I've had many more experiences involving her and the spirits that seem to follow her. This story, though, is one of the mildest ones I can share. It's easier to recall when I'm not in the mood to relive something truly frightening. When I was growing up in far north Queensland, I was told that placing a small bowl of water or a belt at the end of your bed would keep spirits away while you slept. At the time, I believed it. But as I got older, I realized it wasn't that simple. In 2013, when I was 18, I moved in with my first boyfriend. We lived in a one-bedroom granny flat on his parents' property. The flat was old, much older than the main house, and had a strange feeling to it from the start. During the first week, I struggled to sleep. My anxiety was at an all-time high, but I told myself it was just because I was adjusting to a new place. After a few weeks of restless nights, I decided to rearrange the furniture to make myself feel more comfortable. The bedroom had a sliding door that disappeared into the wall. I moved my bed right next to it, reasoning that if anything ever scared me, I could quickly run straight out the door. It worked. I felt safer being so close to the door, and I finally started sleeping well. But then, strange things began to happen. One morning, I went up to the main house for coffee and a chat with my boyfriend's family. About an hour later, my boyfriend came running in, looking pale and frightened. Jokingly, I said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." His reply caught me off guard. "No, but it told me to get up and run." He explained that while he was lying in bed, he heard the voice of a young child urgently whisper, "Quick, get up, get out of here, run." We all laughed it off at first, thinking he must have been dreaming. A few months later, my boyfriend left for the army for 6 months. While he was away, his family and I decided to renovate the granny flat. We started by painting the walls since the floors needed to be replaced anyway. That's when things got even stranger. We began noticing items disappearing or breaking for no reason. There were loud bangs late at night, light bulbs smashing on their own, and voices whispering in the dark. I was woken up several times by something poking me, and quick-moving shadows darted across the room. On top of that, we found feet and handprints in the fresh paint. I tried everything I'd learned as a child. I placed a bowl of water next to my bed, sprinkled salt around the room, and hung a belt at the foot of my bed. None of it helped. Eventually, I was too scared to stay in the flat alone at night and moved into the main house. But even though the flat was empty, the lights kept flickering on and off all through the night. After moving to the main house, I started having trouble sleeping again. I also began seeing figures while working near the flat or when I stepped outside for a cigarette at night. One night, I told the family what I'd seen. 2 figures, one taller and one smaller. They looked at me knowingly and admitted they had seen the same thing. A tall, masculine figure, and a small child. Despite my fear, I still needed to finish the renovations. One morning, I decided to rip up the carpets to prepare the floor for tiling. I moved the bed out of the flat and began tearing up the carpet. When I reached the spot where my bed had been, I froze. There, etched into the cement, was a massive pentagram. I couldn't believe my eyes. Shocked and terrified, I ran to get someone to explain what I'd found. My boyfriend's mother was just as surprised as I was. She said she'd had no idea it was there and pointed out something chilling. The spot with the pentagram was the only place in the flat where I'd been able to sleep peacefully. We quickly filled it in and tiled over the floor. Not long after that, I moved out. I don't know if the strange activity in the flat ever stopped, but I've always wondered why I could only sleep properly while my bed was over the pentagram. May 28, 2015. 2 days after my birthday. It was the day my world stopped, the day my beautiful mother passed away from a stroke. I won't go into too much detail because it was one of the most painful times of my life. I witnessed everything, and it still feels raw. But I will mention that the aneurysm was on the left side of her brain, as that's important to what I'm about to share. I apologize if my story feels scattered. The last 6 months have been such a blur. At 7:30 p.m., the hospital called to tell me she had passed. Later that night, after hours of crying, I was sitting in the living room with my boyfriend. Out of nowhere, I felt an intense, crippling pain on the left side of my head. It wasn't like a regular headache. It was sharp and throbbing, and it only lasted about 20 seconds. I thought it was strange that the pain was on the same side of my head where my mom's aneurysm had been. The next unusual thing happened a couple of days later. I had kept my mom's phone on the cabinet in the living room so I could answer any calls about her passing. It was an older Samsung touchscreen phone, locked with a pattern swipe. Only my boyfriend and I knew the pattern. One day, I walked past the phone and noticed it was unlocked. Confused, I looked around, wondering if maybe one of our cats had stepped on it. But how could a cat unlock a pattern? I called out to ask if anyone had touched the phone. My boyfriend and my best friend were both home, but my boyfriend was outside with her at the time. Neither of them could have unlocked it. The strangest thing happened a few weeks later. My best friend and I decided to visit a place called Pinaroo Valley Memorial Park with our dogs. We walked around for about an hour before finding a spot to sit by the lake. The area was lined with memorial flowers and bronze plaques, and we chose a random bench to rest on. As we sat, my dog began sniffing at the plaque in front of us. When I leaned in to look, I froze. The last name on the plaque was Lewis, my mom's last name. The plaque was also decorated with carnations, her favorite flowers. It felt like an eerie coincidence, but it didn't stop there. After about half an hour, we decided to leave. As we walked back to the car, my best friend noticed something on the ground. I bent down to pick it up, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a broken snow globe of a kiwi bird with Kiwi, New Zealand written on it. My mom was born and raised in New Zealand. Tomorrow, November 13, is my mom's birthday. Later this month, it will be 6 months since she passed. I wonder if I'll experience another unexplained coincidence, something that reminds me she's still with me. Since then, there haven't been many big events, just little things. Sometimes I see shadowy figures in my peripheral vision or notice tiny bright orbs around the house. I've lived in an old workers' cottage in Newtown since 1993. The house is over 100 years old and located in a historic inner-city suburb. I bought it because it had such a good, positive energy, and I'd never experienced anything paranormal there. At least, not until 2003. That year, my eldest son, who was 16 at the time, developed a habit of calling me before he got home. He'd asked me to turn on the front light and leave the door and gate open for him. He did this so often that it started to get annoying. One day, after months of this, he finally admitted why. He said there was a ghost outside our house. At first, I thought he was joking. He had a habit of playing pranks, and I teased him about it, but it became clear he was genuinely scared. He'd rush inside, pale and anxious, and slam the door behind him. I tried to reassure him, saying that if anything strange were happening, I'd be the first to notice. Still, I started to feel uneasy myself. Whenever I watered the front garden in the evening, the hair on my arms would stand on end, as if someone were watching me. One Friday night, I was home alone and could hear my neighbor next door in his kitchen, opening and closing cupboards. My son called as usual, saying the ghost was now on the neighbor's property. I told him to stop being silly. Our neighbor was clearly home. I'd heard him earlier. To prove his point, my son dragged me outside to check. Sure enough, the house next door was completely dark, with no lights on in the front or back. It was empty. A few weeks later, I came home with my younger son, who was just 8 months old. It was late autumn, and the sun was setting, but there was still enough light to see. As I fumbled with my keys at the front gate, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A man in a gray hat and long gray coat gliding silently into the neighbor's property. I say gliding because he didn't make a sound, not even when the wrought iron gate opened. His skin was ghostly white. This was odd because my neighbor was always friendly and would usually say hello. I waited, expecting to hear the sound of a key in the lock, but there was nothing. Nervously, I peeped over the low wall. No one was there. I realized my son had been telling the truth all along, but I didn't say anything to him. I didn't want to scare him even more. 2 weeks later, my eldest and I went to an early movie. Afterward, we were walking back to our house on the opposite side of the road. Just as we were about to cross the street, we both saw it. A tall figure standing in front of the neighbor's house. This time, it was dressed like the Grim Reaper, with a glowing white face and a dark, cape-like garment. My son grabbed my arm, panicked, and whispered, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" I replied calmly, "Yes, I do. But it's nothing to be afraid of. Just keep looking ahead, and let's go home." We crossed the street, walking right past it, and went inside. That was the last time we saw it, though for a while after, I still felt like I was being watched whenever I watered the front garden at night. One evening, I mentally addressed the spirit. I told him he was dead and needed to move on into the light. Months later, I went to see a psychic I trusted and asked about our visitor. She laughed and said, "He's dressed just like the Grim Reaper. He gets a kick out of scaring your son." She explained that he was a young man who had died suddenly and violently. He'd been wandering the area and noticed that my son could see him, so he started following him around. The psychic reassured me that decorative quartz crystal sun catchers in my son's bedroom and a crystal wind chime were keeping the spirit from entering our house. That's why he always stayed outside. Her description of the spirit, a young man who died suddenly and had no proper grave, matched a highly publicized case at the time. A young man, set to testify in a case involving a pedophile ring, had been murdered, his body hidden under concrete near an industrial estate. The body had been found about a year before all of this began. Realizing who the spirit might have been made the whole situation even sadder. This story takes place around Christmas 2015, though I'm not sure of the exact date. It wasn't on the 25th, but close enough to feel festive. Let's dive into the holiday spirit. First, a little background. My dad has become the ultimate skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. I'm convinced this is thanks to my stepmom, a wonderful woman, but the biggest nihilist I've ever met. They've been together since I was a kid. The frustrating part is that my dad has had some of the best ghost encounters I've ever heard of. Years ago, he used to believe in ghosts, but now he refuses to entertain the idea. Whenever I bring up his experiences, he'll say, "Yeah, that happened. I don't know what it was, but it's not a ghost. There's no such thing." He gets super touchy about the topic. My stepmom, on the other hand, loves to talk about ghosts, just so she can explain why she doesn't believe in them. If you mention anything remotely spooky in front of them, you're in for a 20-minute lecture, which could easily stretch into an all-night debate. Now on to the story. This is about my dad's old friend. H was tough, like Mashie tough. He even looked a lot like Danny Trejo. Same build, same height, even a crooked nose from fights. He was missing the tips of a couple of fingers, though I never asked how. Despite his rough exterior, H was a gentle soul with the people he cared about. But if anyone mistreated a woman, he could take down guys twice his size in an instant. H passed away in 2009, but he left a big impression on everyone who knew him. One thing about H and my dad, they loved to argue about music. My dad is a huge Frank Zappa fan and believes all other music is inferior by default. H, on the other hand, loved bands like Rush and Deep Purple. They'd bicker endlessly about it. On this particular evening, around 7 p.m., there were about 5 of us in the lounge. The sun was still up since it was summer in Australia, and the room was filled with overlapping conversations. My dad was on one of his rants, tearing into the guitarist from Deep Purple, saying he wasn't good enough to hold a candle to Zappa. Classic dad. Then, out of nowhere, thumpy thumpy thump, thumpy thump. The sound came from the carpeted lounge floor. It was loud enough to cut through the noise in the room. My friend L and I were the only ones who noticed and looked around. Here's the thing. When H got excited, he had this habit of stomping his feet, whether he was agreeing, laughing, or disagreeing with something. I couldn't help but think, H is not happy with Dad trash-talking Deep Purple right now. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I played it cool and asked, "Is your dryer on? Sounds like it's trying to run away." I love messing with skeptics during moments like this. Without missing a beat, my stepmom chimed in, "It's a fox under the house." Her quick response surprised me. They've had foxes in their yard before, and at least one had gotten under the house. But here's the thing, just a few hours earlier, Dad had proudly shown me how he blocked the hole where the fox had been getting in. He even explained how the local council's recent burn-off nearby meant there hadn't been any fox activity for a while. So naturally, I said, should we unblock the hole so the fox can get out? My stepmom doubled down, insisting the hole was already blocked. This turned into a back and forth. Then how is there a fox under the house? It's knocking the pipes, they said. Yeah, sure. A fox banging pipes under the house? That made no sense. The conversations in the lounge resumed, and Dad went back to criticizing Deep Purple. Then it happened again. Thumpy thumpy. I started wondering if I should just talk to H directly. He'd been into the paranormal, so maybe he'd like the idea of communicating this way. But I decided against it. My dad and stepmom had clearly decided the fox was their go-to explanation for anything weird. A few days later, we were sitting in the lounge late at night, reminiscing about an old TV show we all used to watch, The Bill. H had loved that show but couldn't stand one of the characters, Tommy Stamp. He'd always go on these hilarious, over-the-top rants about how useless Tony was. As we talked and laughed, the thumping started again, this time softer, almost like it was joining the conversation. It felt like H was right there with us, laughing along. Dad muttered to himself, "There goes the fox again," and left it at that. Here's the funny part. When H used to visit Dad, he always brought a kitchen chair into the lounge, even though there were plenty of armchairs. He'd sit near the fireplace, and that's exactly where the thumping had been coming from. There's no way this was a fox running around banging pipes, especially since the hole had been blocked for weeks. Foxes are quiet, nimble creatures, not exactly the type to make loud, stomping noises. But I guess my dad and stepmom would rather believe in a noisy, pipe-banging fox than the idea that H might still be dropping by to give his 2 cents. As I mentioned in my first account, I've seen things my whole life. My parents often told me stories of how, as a child, I would stop and have full conversations with thin air. They said I described details no child of 3 to 6 years old could possibly know. I don't remember doing this, but apparently I stopped around the age of 6. After that, I still saw strange things, but I didn't interact with them. Nothing significant happened until I was almost 20 years old. This experience took place in late 2001. Yes, I just gave away my age, lol. At the time, I was living with my family in Southport on the Gold Coast. Our house was on a large block, set back from the street. It shared a driveway with a 4-story block of units that had an underground car park. The main entrance to the units was behind a small garden with a large tree in the center. The front door was one of those old metal and glass security doors that automatically locked when closed. It made a loud noise every time it opened or shut. I lived with my dad, 2 brothers, L, 18, and K, 16, and my 13-year-old sister. My brother L and I had made friends with some of the residents in the unit block and often visited them. One evening around 5:30 p.m., after finishing work, L and I went to see one of these friends who lived on the ground floor. There were about 6 of us hanging out on the balcony, which had a short drop into the garden. None of us had even finished our first drinks when I noticed movement near the entrance. Someone had come out of the building and was walking down the path toward the driveway. Curious, I turned to see if I recognized the person. It was a woman in an old-fashioned, all-white dress. I didn't know her. Then I realized something strange. I hadn't heard the door open or close. That door was always loud, and yet it had been completely silent. The woman stepped off the path into the garden, passed behind the tree, and disappeared. I waited for her to come out from behind the tree, but she didn't. That's when I noticed my brother and 2 of the others had been watching her too. We all decided to look for her, though the 2 people who hadn't seen her stayed behind, thinking we were joking. We checked everywhere: the entrance, the car park, the street, and even the driveway leading to my house. When we reached the driveway, my dad was sitting outside having a cigarette. We asked if he had seen anyone come down in the past 5 minutes. He said he'd been sitting there for at least 15 minutes and hadn't seen anyone. The woman was nowhere to be found. Over the next month, I tried to figure out who she might have been. I researched the property and the area, but didn't find anything that could explain her presence. During the 18 months I continued living there, I saw her 8 more times. There didn't seem to be any pattern to her appearances, different lunar cycles, times of day, and weather conditions. She always disappeared behind the tree. We tried talking to her, but she never responded or showed any sign that she could hear us. Some of the others decided to try a Ouija board to contact her, but I refused. I'd seen too many horror movies, and I knew how that story ends, lol. As far as I know, they never made contact with anyone. Growing up in Southeast Asia, the 7th month of the lunar calendar always felt strange. According to Buddhist and Taoist beliefs, this was when the king of hell released ghosts and spirits to wander the world of the living. They called it the Hungry Ghosts Festival, and people were warned to be careful, as wandering spirits might visit the living during this time. Since I wasn't Buddhist or Taoist, I didn't pay much attention to these beliefs, but this year felt different. These have been sad and unsettling times, and as Ghost Month approached, everything around me seemed slightly off, blurry around the edges, like the world was out of focus. Not long before the start of Ghost Month, I had a dream about my childhood home in Singapore. I hadn't dreamed of that place in years. The dream showed the bedroom at the back of our Queenstown flat, near the kitchen. The walls were a soft yellow, or maybe it was just the sunlight streaming through the window on the left. In the dream, I was lying on my back on a single bed. To my right was the doorway, and on the other bed, along the kitchen wall, someone was getting in. I thought it was my elder sister. She tugged at the sheets near my feet, and at first, I thought she was just straightening them. But then she started pulling them off completely. I told her to stop, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she grabbed my left foot so hard that the pain woke me up. Sitting up in my real bed, I saw a small, dark figure in the room, off to my right. It felt like something had followed me out of my dream, or maybe it was the cause of the pain. Silently, I called on whatever protective spirit might be nearby and firmly told the shadow to leave. At that moment, 2 loud cracks came from the glass door at the back of the house, like someone clapping their hands in command. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the shadow was gone. My left foot, however, was still sore. I rubbed it for several minutes, but the pain didn't go away. When I checked it under the bathroom light, my left foot was swollen, larger than my right. On the right foot, I noticed a small round bruise, about the size of an Australian 5-cent coin, as if it were a finger mark. My husband, Rex, slept through it all, though he vaguely remembered being woken by the sound of crackling glass. Later that day, I messaged a friend to share what happened. He suggested that a guardian spirit might have answered my call and chased away an unwelcome visitor. As he said this, the same glass door made another loud "Sirikk." Coincidence? A few days later, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when something caught my eye. A large blue flask, with a glass on top of it, began sliding across the granite countertop. It moved about an inch, right in front of the knife block. I lifted the flask and glass to check if the counter was wet or slippery, but both the granite and the base of the flask were dry. Just as I was examining the area, an empty vanilla essence bottle and 2 stacked plastic containers shifted an inch to the right. The containers didn't topple over, and I had the strong feeling that someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. The flask alone was heavy, so moving it seemed like no small feat. I said, "Cool. Neat trick." But as soon as I acknowledged it, nothing else happened. Oddly enough, an empty jam jar on the edge of the sink didn't move at all. It felt as if care was being taken not to cause any harm. The next morning, I received an email from my cousin in Singapore. My much-loved auntie May had passed away in Hong Kong. Considering the time difference, I realized her passing likely happened around the time I saw the objects move in the kitchen. Auntie May had been my mother's eldest sister and was like a second mother to her growing up in post-war Singapore. She was strong-willed, full of energy, and always sincere in her actions. Her advice was practical and grounded, and she had a way of making people feel cared for. As I sat at my laptop, thinking about how much I would miss her, a wave of sadness washed over me. Then, I smelled sandalwood. The scent reminded me of Buddhist temples, meditation, and spiritual things. It was as if someone had lit incense sticks for a prayer. None of my neighbors burn incense, so the smell was unexpected. The Hungry Ghost Festival falls on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month. It's a time deeply rooted in devotion, duty, and compassion. According to legend, a Buddhist monk's deep love for his mother moved the king of hell to ease her suffering in purgatory. As a result, all the souls in his domain were granted a brief reprieve, allowed to wander the world of the living. Buddhists and Taoists believe some of these wandering spirits are those who didn't receive proper rituals when they passed, or they may be ancestors whose families neglected to pay their respects. In places like Singapore, people offer food and burn prayer money to bring these spirits peace and to avoid bad luck. This year, Ghost Month brought with it some strange experiences. In mid-August, I was enjoying a lazy morning, half dozing in bed with the TV murmuring in the background. I could hear my husband, Rex, brushing his teeth in the bathroom. Suddenly, I found myself standing on a footpath, looking at a grassy spot between 2 houses. A cat was creeping through the tall grass by a brown fence, its markings like a snow leopard's and its size close to that of a lynx cub. Its ears were pointed with white wisps at the tips. The scene was so vivid. I could feel the firmness of the footpath under my feet, smell the fresh grass and damp soil, and hear the distant hum of the TV. Before I could take a step toward the cat, I was back in bed. Later that afternoon, I was standing in the basement car park by the elevator, waiting for Rex to lock the garage. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman walking toward me from the emergency exit. She looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, with a slim build, short bobbed hair, and pale skin. She wore a white blouse with small black and yellow prints and a knee-length black skirt. It was the middle of winter in Australia, but her legs were bare. I turned to look at her more closely, wondering how she wasn't cold. I also wanted to note where she was heading so we could keep a safe social distance. But then, she was gone. The fire door hadn't opened or closed. She was simply there one moment, walking toward a garage, and then gone. It was like her image had been distorted, as if I were seeing her through water or a window pane. Our building is over 20 years old, and we've lived here for 19. Rex mentioned that the site used to have an insurance building, and its possible parts of the foundation were reused. The woman looked like she could have been dressed for an office job or uniform. It struck me that she didn't seem to notice me. Was she just an imprint of the past, a leftover echo? Or could I have been an echo in hers? I realized then we were still in the middle of Ghost Month. Coincidence? A week later, I was boiling eggs for me gory noodles. Turning to grab scissors from the knife block, I noticed one pair was partially blocked by bottles, so I chose another pair. When I looked back at the stove, I saw the glass lid covering the pot. For a moment, I thought I might have done it absent-mindedly, but I never covered pots when boiling eggs. If I'd been on autopilot, I would have followed my usual routine. Confused, I picked up the lid to put it in the sink and saw the first pair of scissors sitting on the counter next to the sink. Someone, or something, had placed them there. I hadn't done it. The bottles were still in the way. Smiling, I said, "Thank you," returned the scissors, and went back to making lunch. It didn't feel alarming, just oddly helpful. Around the end of August, Rex and I were watching the TV drama Hungry Ghosts. In one scene, the main character burned joss sticks at a family altar for her grandmother. Suddenly, I smelled sandalwood. Jumping up, I checked the bedroom window and the hallway, thinking the scent might have drifted in from outside, but it was only near my side of the bed, and it disappeared after a minute. It reminded me of Auntie May, who had recently passed away. Her funeral had been zoomed from Hong Kong to our family around the world because of the pandemic and travel restrictions. I had only received the Zoom link during the final moments and missed the service. The sandalwood scent felt like her way of saying goodbye. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We lived in a 50-year-old house in West Vancouver, British Columbia, from 1979 to 2007. During our time there, we experienced many strange events that we couldn't explain. I began to think there was a ghost and maybe even a ghost cat in the house. Here are some of the incidents I remember. My mother had a beautiful sofa covered in elegant white fabric. One side of it was against the window, and the other was a little away from the space between the sofa and the wall, but no coffee table, so it created a cozy nook. Over time, the armrest on the side of the sofa near the wall started to get shredded. It looked as if a cat had been scratching it, but we didn't have any pets. We loved animals, but I'm allergic to furry ones, especially cats. At first, we tried to explain it away. Maybe I was scratching it with my elbow when I sat there, or my rings were damaging the fabric. My mother's favorite explanation was that the sun coming through the window was wearing out the fabric, but the damage was only on the side of the sofa near the wall, not where the sun hit. Over time, the rips became more and more always vertical, like a cat had used that side as a scratching post. The rest of the sofa stayed perfect. When guests came over, we would cover that part of the sofa with a blanket, but for some reason, the blanket never stayed in place. After living there for a while, I began to notice strange things happening while I was napping. I would sometimes feel someone sitting at the edge of my bed. As a family doctor, I often felt burnt out by the end of the week and would nap on the weekends. A few times I woke up feeling someone sit down next to me. At first, I thought it was my husband or my son, but this weight felt different. Both of them had sat on the bed before, but this felt like the weight of a stranger. I would open my eyes to see who it was, but no one was there. This happened twice, spaced apart by a long time. Then one afternoon, I felt someone put a hand on my shoulder and shake me awake, as if to say, "Come on, sleepyhead, it's time to go." The hand was cool, not icy, but it didn't feel familiar. I thought it was my husband, but when I opened my eyes, no one was there. Another time, while I was napping, I felt something light jump onto the bed. It was as if a cat had jumped up. I just knew it was the ghost cat. This only happened once. About a year later, while playing badminton with my son in the backyard, I noticed a young woman sitting on the stone wall, watching us. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with curly, dark blonde hair, wearing a light blue long dress and ankle-high lace-up boots. She seemed amused, but when I turned to look at her more closely, she was gone. One winter, my husband asked for help finding his favorite toque hat. We searched everywhere, turning over his clothes, but couldn't find it. My husband is very attached to his things, so we searched for hours. After lunch, I went back into our bedroom and saw his toque lying on top of a pile of clothes we had left to clean up. It was lying there neatly, not crumpled, as if someone had placed it carefully. I didn't think much of it, assuming my husband had found it and just hadn't put the clothes back. A day or two later, he was wearing the toque. I said, "You must be happy to have found your toque." He said, "I thought you had found it. We asked our son, but he didn't know anything about it." None of us had found it. Someone else must have. Another time, I mentioned to my husband that it might be a good idea for him to use Post-its as bookmarks, like I do. His bookmarks would often slip out or get lost. That night, when I went to bed, I found an open book on my pillow, with a yellow Post-it marking the right page. It was a book I had started reading a long time ago, but never finished, and I had put it on a shelf above our bed. I thought my husband had found the book and put it there as a hint, but when I asked him, he said he hadn't touched it, and neither had our son. My husband doesn't believe in ghosts, and he wasn't interested in these strange happenings, but I knew it was our friendly house ghost. She must have overheard our conversation about the Post-its and found the book with the marker. It was as if she was saying, "See, I can hear you." I put the book back on the shelf, and I realized that among the hundreds of books on that shelf, only one of them had the Post-it. It was very unlikely anyone would have found it by chance. There are many more little incidents like these. Nothing too dramatic, except for the shredded sofa. They were small things that became part of our lives and couldn't be explained away. I believe a young woman and her cat had lived in that house long before we moved in, and they were still around, quietly watching us. I never felt threatened, even when the closet doors would suddenly bang open and close with no one around. I didn't understand why that happened, but I never felt angry or afraid. In fact, since she helped us find the toque, I thought she was a kind presence. Lately, my mirrors have been playing tricks on me again. If you've read one of my earlier stories, you'll know that the images in my mirrors sometimes shake, even though the mirrors themselves stay still. I recently added 2 more mirrors to my bedroom. Even though mirrors scare me, I can't help but love them. Both mirrors are on different walls. One is a blue mirror, right next to my bedroom door. When you walk into the room and go straight to the computer desk, which I always do, you can see yourself walk by in the blue mirror. The other is a pink mirror on the opposite wall next to my closet door. It's on the far right of the room, about a foot above the computer desk. Sometimes when I walk into my bedroom, I'll notice that my reflection appears in the pink mirror, not the blue one where it should be. I turn around and look again, and my reflection is back in the blue mirror. This has happened several times now. Other times, when I sit on my bed and glance at the pink mirror, I'll see my face in it for a split second. This has happened more than once. My mirrors are getting stranger and stranger. Last night, I stayed up really late, or rather, early in the morning. It was 6 a.m., As a night owl, I wasn't tired and had trouble sleeping. I was reading a book when suddenly I felt a very menacing presence, like the ghost that seems to linger around here now. I'm not sure what made him angry, but I think it has something to do with this. My friend Cassie and I had been curious about him and decided to try using a Ouija board to learn more about him. We both felt that same heavy presence when I talked to her about it. For some reason, he really doesn't like Ouija boards. We ended up deciding not to go through with it because of how strong and angry the presence felt. I figured that there must be a good reason why he dislikes them so much. Now, whenever I talk about Ouija boards, or even type the word, I feel that same menacing presence, like right now. It only seems to calm down when I reassure him that we decided not to use the board, almost as if it comforts him. Well, last night, I was just thinking about the Ouija board when that presence suddenly appeared. It was even stronger than before. I looked around, and for a few seconds, I saw a red dot darting around the room. The TV, which was off, showed strange images, and I saw shadows moving. I got scared and ducked under my covers. Normally, I don't face the closet when I sleep, so I turned to my right, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something above me. I looked up to see what it was, and there, glaring down at me, was the face of a man. He had brown hair, combed thickly over, and was probably in his late 30s or 40s, with a few wrinkles. He was staring down at me, glaring in a way that made me freeze in fear. Terrified, I ducked under the covers and squeezed my eyes shut, facing the closet. The presence didn't disappear until I promised that I wouldn't use the Ouija board. Once I made that promise, the presence left, and I jumped up, staying out of my room for a while. I only saw the man's face for a split second, but it wasn't just his head floating without a body. It was like he had a full body, but that was all he could show me at that moment, almost as if he didn't have enough power to fully manifest. When I was 12, my family and I moved into an old house in Conception Bay, Newfoundland. We lived there for the next 10 years, and for the most part, we were very happy. However, it didn't take long for us to realize that the house wasn't as empty as we thought. The house had been in the same family for generations. We were the first outsiders to ever own it. Over the years, it had served as a general store, the foundations of which were still on our lawn, a nursing home, and had even been moved a kilometer. Needless to say, it had a lot of history and character. A friend of mine was related to the original owners, and the week we moved in, she casually asked me, "So, has anything happened?" At the time, I didn't know what she meant, but soon enough, I would. From the moment we moved in, we all felt like we weren't alone. At first, no one said anything, but we later realized that we all had the same feeling. It wasn't fear, just a sense of caution. I always felt that if I looked behind me or opened my eyes in bed at night, someone would be watching me. About a month after we moved in, I saw my first ghost. My older sister and I were the only ones home. She was on the top floor, and I was downstairs. I walked into the living room holding a snack and glanced up the stairs. The sunlight from the hall window was shining down, and I saw the silhouette of someone holding the railing and looking down at me. I thought it was my sister, but as soon as I looked up, the figure quickly ran away. I rolled my eyes, thinking it was just her being childish, and went upstairs to find her. To my surprise, she was in her bedroom, watching TV. This was odd because the spot where I had seen the figure was far from her room, and she would have had to run there to fake being in bed. She was 17, so this wasn't like her. I asked, what was the point of that? She looked at me with a blank stare, then told me it wasn't her. The color drained from her face when I explained what I had seen. After that, we all started to notice more strange things in the house. I began to talk out loud to the spirits, telling them that I didn't want to see them anymore, but I didn't feel they were malicious. Over the years, there were many small incidents. One summer day, when I was home alone, a large painting fell off the living room wall. It had been securely fastened, and there was no reason for it to just fall. My friends who stayed over would often ask who was walking around upstairs. I'd tell them it was just the house creaking, but I knew better. My mom and I also frequently saw small balls of light floating around, especially in the kitchen and family room. Our dog would notice these too. She'd suddenly wake up and stare at seemingly nothing. But the most significant events happened during our final year in the house. One night I was asleep when I woke up to hear my mother's blood-curdling screams. My sister and I rushed to her room, not knowing what to expect. Mom was sitting up in bed, looking terrified. When we asked what had happened, she said it was just a bad dream. However, after we moved out, she told us what really happened. She had suddenly woken up and immediately felt that someone was in her room. She saw an old woman sitting in a chair just a few feet from her bed. At first, she thought it was the ghost of her own mother, but when she looked more closely, she realized she didn't recognize the face. The woman stared at her, unblinking, and then disappeared. That's when my mom screamed. This happened at least once more in the months that followed. The final event is one I'm especially grateful for. During our last year there, my mother suffered several small strokes. One day, she was in the kitchen when she suddenly lost feeling in her legs and collapsed onto her knees. As she continued to lose sensation, she felt like she was about to fall face first onto the floor. But just before she hit the ground, she felt someone grab her by the shoulders and gently lay her on her side. She was sure that it was the spirits of the house looking out for her. I've had several strange experiences throughout my life, though only a few stand out clearly in my memory. The first one happened when I was around 3 or 4 years old. I was lying in bed early in the morning, around 8 a.m., when I suddenly felt something cold on my back. When I turned around to see what it was, I saw a long, bony, white hand reaching toward me. At that age, I didn't stick around to find out more. I was terrified, and my parents had a hard time calming me down. The next experience occurred when I was about 13 or 14. I was either dreaming or having an out-of-body experience, though I'm still not sure. In the dream, there was a figure hovering in the doorway of my bedroom. She wore a torn white nightgown, and her skin was green, as if it were rotting. Her eye sockets were empty, and she floated closer to me. I couldn't move, only feel an overwhelming sense of fear. She tilted her head curiously and hovered by my ear. Then she whispered the word, "Dragona," to me. I physically heard the word, and as soon as it happened, I woke up. But the fear stayed with me long after the experience. There have been a lot of smaller random things that I've passed off as just the house being old. Things like creaky floors, loud neighbors, doors closing that I blamed on the wind, and unexplained thumping through the hall. Objects would disappear, only to reappear later, often in plain view in my closet. I lived in another house across the street from an old cemetery, and that's where things got even stranger. My roommate and I would often hear things fall, but when we went to check, nothing had actually fallen. One night, I thought the light in my room had blown, so I pushed the dimmer switch to see if there was still power to the light. When I did, the light turned on full blast by itself. We also saw what looked like a smoke-like cloud in my room sometimes. Another odd thing was the temperature. No matter where I was in the house, my room was always either way too cold or way too hot. Even in the middle of winter, with the heat off and the fan running, it would still feel warm. The most recent experience happened just a few days ago. My old roommate had a phone that had been disconnected for over a year. On Friday, October 30th, she noticed random texts were coming through on it. At first, she thought the phone had been mistakenly reconnected, but when she tried to reply, she got an error message. She also tried calling, but it said the phone wasn't active. What was strange was that the texts were sent from the same number each time, though the number would change with every message. Even weirder, the phone started playing a ringtone that neither of us recognized, but it just so happened to be the song she plays for her 2-month-old son at bedtime. We both have experiences when we're not together, but it seems like the strange things happen more often when we're near each other. I've been told by people that I'm sensitive to spirits and that they are trying to reach out to me because I can see, hear, and feel them. I'm still not sure if these experiences are just a result of an overactive imagination or if something else is really going on, but I know that something unusual is happening, especially with the more recent events. To understand my story, I need to share something very personal. In late February to early March of 2006, I discovered I was pregnant with my 4th child. Tragically, I suffered a missed miscarriage on May 15, 2006. I was supposed to be 11 weeks and 1 day, but an ultrasound showed the baby had passed away at around 6 weeks and 6 days. For some reason, I felt that I had lost a daughter. The loss was devastating, and I was deeply traumatized by it. I struggled to cope with the pain, eventually leaving my job and focusing all my attention on my other 3 children. Shortly after, we moved from Edmonton, Alberta to White Rock, British Columbia. We settled into a 3-bedroom rancher, and from the moment we moved in, strange things started happening. Even my kids noticed the unusual activity. One of the first things I noticed was while I was in the bathroom. I could hear two voices, an older woman and a younger one, talking through the heat vents. I could hear them clearly, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was unsettling, and it made me feel like the house was alive in some way. As strange as it was, I didn't think much of it at first, but the activity in the house started to increase. In late September 2006, I found out I was pregnant again, and that's when the odd happenings really picked up. The pregnancy was tough, and I was in and out of the hospital, but in late May 2007, I had my baby, a boy. When my son was 3 months old, my husband had to leave for work. I was alone with our 3 boys and our daughter, all under the age of 6. The night my husband was gone, I was sleeping when I heard a soft little girl's voice whispering, "Mommy, Mommy, wake up, Mommy." At first, I thought it was my daughter, but as I stirred, the voice repeated itself. I realized immediately that it wasn't her. The voice seemed to be whispering right next to where my baby's bassinet was. When I opened my eyes, there was no one there. I called out for my daughter, thinking maybe she had wandered into her brother's room. But when I went in there, she wasn't there either. I then went to her room and found her sound asleep in her crib. She could get out of her crib, but not back in, so there was no way it was her calling me. Needless to say, it was deeply unsettling. Due to my husband's work, we moved back to Edmonton, this time into a brand new townhouse. I was happy to leave the house in White Rock behind, as too many strange things had happened there. I told my husband about the little girl's voice I had heard, and he just said it was probably our baby saying hi. In mid-January 2008, I heard that same familiar little girl's voice again, but this time it was even more intense. The voice called out to me, "Mommy, please get up. Mommy, please." It was as if I could feel the presence of the little girl standing right in front of me, so close that I could almost feel her breath. The urgency in her voice was so intense it made me bolt upright in bed. My husband had also heard the voice and sat up beside me. We both looked around the room, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. My husband quickly ran down the hall to check on the kids, and they were all sound asleep. Our daughter was snoring peacefully in her bed, just as we had left her. That night, my husband was very unsettled, and I cried because I felt so helpless. I truly believed that the voice belonged to the little girl I had lost. I still remember the date she was supposed to be born. Since then, I haven't been woken up by the voice, but occasionally a toy will go off by itself. It's a toy that requires you to push a button to make it play, and sometimes it starts playing on its own. We usually shut it off and say good night, but I wonder if it's her still trying to reach out to me. I've had many unexplainable experiences throughout my life, dating back to when I was just 5 years old. It all began with a tragic event. In January of 1970, my mother and I were in a car accident near Carp, Ontario, on our way to see her father in the hospital in Ottawa. He had just been diagnosed with cancer. Sadly, my mother died in the accident. That summer, while I was at home, I heard my deceased mother calling me from outside. I went outside and saw her sitting on the swing set. I remember feeling so happy to see her, not understanding what ghosts were at that age. We talked for several minutes, and I vividly remember her asking how my middle brother was. We gently swung back and forth beneath a weeping willow tree. Then I heard the screen door slam behind me. When I turned to look, my mother was gone. Later that year, my grandfather, whom we had been going to visit in the hospital, died of lung cancer in November. After his death, I moved in with my grandmother, as it wasn't common for girls to stay in homes without women back then. My 2 brothers stayed with my father. My grandmother and I eventually moved from their large house into an apartment in Almonte, Ontario, where I had my own room with 2 beds in it. I always slept in the steel 3/4 bed, and one night I woke up to see my grandfather. He appeared as a kind of foggy figure, but clearly defined, wearing a ring with a bright light shining from it. I froze, unable to scream or move. It felt like something was blocking my throat. I pulled the covers over my head, and when I looked again, he was gone. I told my grandmother about it, and she explained that my grandfather's 2 sons had been fighting over his ring, which had a diamond in it. One of them had even taken it off his finger while he was in the casket. Since those early experiences, I've had many more, but none involving people I recognized. One particularly unsettling period was when my ex-husband and I lived in a rented farmhouse outside of Perth, Ontario. The activity there was intense. At a New Year's Eve dinner party, the kitchen taps turned on full force by themselves, witnessed by others. I could also hear someone walking up the back stairs from the kitchen to our bedroom at night. Specific footsteps, not just creaky boards. One morning, I noticed a handprint left on the frost of an upstairs window, but there was no way anyone could have reached that window from outside. We didn't last a month in that house before we called the owners and told them we were leaving. The neighbor, who had once pulled me out of a ditch, told me that the elderly couple who had lived there both died in the house within a month of each other. I also had a few strange experiences in a farmhouse I owned near Foresters Falls, Ontario. My children were terrified of going to bed alone, and my daughter never slept through the night. She would wake up crying and screaming every night. The lights in the upstairs hall would flicker on and off by themselves. Our dog, a Rottweiler, would suddenly jump up from a sound sleep, her hackles raised, staring into the hallway and growling. One night, I saw a man in the hallway who appeared to be dressed from the turn of the century. He conveyed to me that he was lost and was trying to get to Foresters Falls. The day we bought the house, when we tried to unlock the front door, something was pushing on the other side, preventing us from opening it. The previous owners had moved far away, so I couldn't ask them about it. The house where my husband and I now live, near Cobden, Ontario, also seems to have its own strange occurrences. For the longest time, we would both wake up at exactly 3 a.m., hearing what sounded like people arguing in the basement. I couldn't make out the words from the second floor, but the tone of the voices was unmistakable. I would wake my husband and ask if he could hear them, but he'd just roll over and go back to sleep, saying I was crazy. While we were building our house, I was out in the garden one Sunday afternoon, checking for potato bugs. Suddenly, I was pushed very hard from behind, and I fell to the ground on my hands and knees. I thought it was my husband playing a prank, but when I turned around, no one was there. We built a wraparound porch with large windows around the house. On several occasions, I asked my husband to go outside and check who was walking past the windows, but each time, he saw no one. He refuses to believe me, and I'm not sure why, but I know what I saw. 1 month ago, in the middle of the night, we both woke up after hearing a loud bang inside the house. My husband was panting, asking if I had heard it. I said yes, and he whispered, "It sounds like there's someone downstairs." But when he got up to check, no one was there, and there were no tracks on our driveway the next morning, even though the snow was fresh. I've had a feeling of panic when I go into the basement, where the kids' bedrooms used to be before they moved out. A few times, I've thought I saw shadows race across the hall in front of me as I approached the laundry room. My heart races, but I try to ignore it and keep going. It's strange to me that everywhere I've lived, there has always been something happening, something unexplained. I don't know why this follows me, but it always does. Let me just say that everything I'm about to tell you is completely true, and not some paranoid fantasy. I'm not the only one who experienced these things. When my youngest sister was born, my parents decided we needed a bigger place, so they moved us into an old farmhouse. Yes, a cliché. At first, it was pretty cool. Everyone had their own room, and we even had a sitting room upstairs. But about a month after we moved in, things started to get strange. My mom, who was still recovering from my sister's birth, usually stayed downstairs during the day, but one day, for some reason, she needed to go upstairs and check on us. When she left the room, I suddenly got a really bad feeling. It turned out to be right. A few moments later, I saw my mom standing at the top of the stairs, and it looked like someone had shoved her. She fell and hit nearly every step on the way down. Fortunately, my dad came home just a few minutes later and rushed her to the hospital, but that wasn't where the strange happenings stopped. About 5 months later, my dad had to have a minor surgery that required him to stay awake for 48 hours beforehand, so my cousin came over to keep him company. One night, my dad decided to take a hot shower upstairs. About 10 minutes later, my cousin saw a shadow moving down the stairs and asked my dad why he was standing there. but my dad hadn't answered because he was still in the shower. My cousin got freaked out and refused to stay the night at our house ever again. Now this next part happened to me. I was around 8 years old at the time, and I know some people might think it was just my imagination, but I was always a very grounded kid who didn't daydream much. One morning, I woke up to go to the bathroom around 6 a.m., which was about an hour earlier than I usually got up. As I came out, I saw a woman in a white nightgown walking down the stairs. I wasn't scared at first because I thought it was my mom, so I followed her down the stairs into the kitchen. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, she was gone. I called out, "Mom, where did you go?" And then I heard my mom yell at me from the top of the stairs to get back upstairs. I ran back up, confused, and asked her how she managed to get back upstairs so fast. Her face went pale, and she quickly grabbed me and my sisters, taking us into her room. She set my dad down to check the house, and he came back 20 minutes later, saying all the doors were locked and he didn't find anyone. But that wasn't the end of it. About a year later, I was getting ready for bed, and as usual, I left my clothes on the floor next to my bed. I went across the room to turn on my nightlight. It wasn't there because I was afraid of the dark, but because my room didn't have any other light. The light had a cover on it to dim the brightness, which I never took off because if I did, I couldn't sleep. Around 5 a.m., I woke up having trouble breathing and noticed that the wall near my nightlight was on fire. My pants from the day before were lying over it, which I thought was what caused the fire. I ran into my parents' room and told them. My dad rushed in with the fire extinguisher and put the fire out. Both of my parents scolded me for supposedly throwing my pants across. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.